Chapter 28:30. The second secret realm. Could it be that Yi Xian's goal was to sit at home and peacefully be his provincial governor? No. What Yi Xian pursued was great power, because Yi Xian still had things he wanted to do. For example, find Luo Luo. However, after entering the god realm for so long, other than knowing that Luo Luo was in the demon god's domain, Yi Xian didn't have any other clues. After living a peaceful and stable life for too long, Yi Xian knew that he couldn't continue like this. If he wanted to obtain strength, he could only fight for it himself. The War of the Gods domain was indeed a place that could quickly increase one's strength. However, the War of the Gods domain was something that only happened once in hundreds of thousands of years. Could it be that Yi Xian was still sitting here and waiting for hundreds of thousands of years? Step by step, Yi Xian directly stepped into the second secret realm. At the beginning, there wasn't anything worth paying attention to in the second secret realm. It was different from the other secret realms. After entering the second secret realm, Yi Xian seemed to have entered a dark cave. It was dark and quiet. Other than Yi Xian's footsteps, there didn't seem to be anything else here. However, there was something strange that caused Yi Xian to be on guard. That was, in this place, Yi Xian's spiritual will was restricted by a mysterious power. It could be said that Yi Xian's divine will could only detect the wall, but it couldn't penetrate it at all. The most important thing was that he didn't even know what that wall was. The other thing was the pressure. Within the cave, with every step Yi Xian took, the pressure would increase by a bit. This feeling was as if the second secret realm was simply a place that didn't want to be disturbed by others. Therefore, it used pressure to try to force people to leave. However, was that really the case? Was this place that was called the Realm of Death really that simple? He just wanted to rely on pressure to force Yi Xian back? Yi Xian walked forward step by step. At this moment, faint beads of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. This was because the pressure in the second secret realm was simply too strong. This feeling of constantly increasing pressure was truly unbearable. It wasn't the pressure itself, but the boundless feeling. Even Yi Xian couldn't help but want to turn around and return. It was as if a voice was constantly hinting in Yi Xian's ear. Go back. As long as he turned his head back, he would no longer have to endure such a powerful pressure. In fact, Yi Xian had indeed twisted his body. When he no longer headed towards the second secret realm, it was as if all the pressure had disappeared in an instant. That feeling was truly comfortable. However, Yi Xian was Yi Xian. No matter what kind of obstacles there were in the second secret realm, since Yi Xian had already decided to enter, then he wouldn't give up. I want to see just what kind of secrets are hidden inside. Yi Xian bit his lip as he muttered to himself. In an instant, this sentence seemed to be spread out infinitely. It echoed in the cave time and time again. The sound echoed again and again, getting smaller and smaller. Anyone with a bit of common sense would know that this meant that there was still an endless distance in front of the cave. Yi Xian frowned slightly, but he wasn't afraid as he continued to take a step forward. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! A powerful pressure instantly descended onto Yi Xian's body. As he moved further and further away, the pressure on Yi Xian's body grew stronger and stronger. Fortunately, the pressure here did not contain any killing intent. It was just pure pressure. Otherwise, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to withstand it. However, how could things be that simple? Yi Xian took another step forward. In an instant, an incomparably violent killing intent exploded out. The killing intent was wrapped within the pressure, and in that instant, countless illusions actually appeared in front of Yi Xian. They were all people that Yi Xian had once killed. Headless enemies, broken enemies, split in half, and even enemies that had already become minced meat. Countless voices sounded out beside Yi Xian. Return my life. You deserve to die. We're so lonely, come and accompany us. Countless voices exploded in an instant, accompanied by an incomparably powerful killing intent. It could be said that Yi Xian's entire body was drenched in cold sweat in an instant. Ding, the host has been affected by the illusion. It is being automatically removed. Ding, the illusion has been cleared. Illusion. It was actually just an illusion. At this moment, Yi Xian's entire body was drenched in sweat. Although it was only in the blink of an eye, Yi Xian truly felt what fear was. Originally, other than these voices, these illusions, and the powerful pressure and killing intent, this place could actually expand the fear of the person who entered. Yi Xian finally understood why someone was able to successfully walk out of this place. Moreover, once they left, they would either go crazy or become stupid. He had been scared out of his wits on this road. Even Yi Xian, with his powerful mind and the protection of the system, almost fell for it, let alone the others. This wasn't a matter of realm or cultivation at all. On this path, what those who entered needed to defeat the most was not some pressure or killing intent illusion, but rather, what they needed to defeat was themselves. Their own inner demons. Which expert didn't kill people? No matter what was right or wrong, it was inevitable that a shadow would be left in their hearts. Normally, these shadows wouldn't have the slightest effect on him. In fact, like Yi Xian, he never felt that he'd killed any innocent people. However, in the cave of the second secret realm, there was a strange power that would constantly affect the judgment of those who entered. When the person who entered was completely focused on resisting the pressure, a powerful killing intent and illusions suddenly exploded out. It was likely that not many people would be able to withstand it. There was only one consequence of not being able to see through it, and that was to be infected by those negative emotions, or even to the point of occupying one's divine sense. Not to mention occupying one's divine sense, even if it was only a little bit, it would still be expanded time and time again because of the uniqueness of this place. The final result was to be devoured by negative emotions. This place could infinitely magnify the inner demons in one's heart. The first test of the second secret realm was the test of one's own inner demons. If one wanted to pass, then one either had an incomparably strong mind or had never done anything with a clear conscience. That sudden explosion was enough to cause anyone who entered the 9th floor and above to be directly washed out, regardless of their cultivation. Fortunately, the system prompted him to come into contact with the illusion. Otherwise, Yi Xian would have died here as well. Yi Xian frowned. However, he didn't hesitate at all and continued walking forward. Chapter 2831. 2419. The test the first time was someone Yi Xian killed. The second time was someone by Yi Xian's side who died in vain. The third time was someone Yi Xian was familiar with. Fortunately, no matter who they were, as long as they were illusions, the system would immediately come into contact with them. This place is very interesting. The first time, it scared you to death. The second time, it made you feel guilty to death. The third time, it made you fall into the sorrow of longing. It seems like this second secret realm was built by someone and not formed naturally. Yi Xian said indifferently with a smile on his face. It seemed that he'd already grasped some special changes in the second secret realm. Continue forward. Once Yi Xian figured this out, his mood naturally became much more relaxed. It was unknown if it was because Yi Xian had already comprehended it, or if there weren't any obstructions to begin with. In short, Yi Xian's progress was exceptionally smooth. Until Yi Xian saw a ray of light. That ray of light represented the exit. Yi Xian turned around and looked at the dark cave. He sighed with emotion in his heart. In fact, this kind of test was truly difficult. Compared to fighting and killing, this kind of existence that induced one's own negative emotions was more of a threat to those who entered. After all, this test required those who entered to defeat their own inner demons. In fact, it even strengthened the inner demons by several times. Yi Xian walked out of the cave with a step, only to discover that the flash behind him suddenly flickered and then disappeared. In front of Yi Xian, there were dozens of circular platforms. There was no introduction, but the layout of the platforms was almost exactly the same. On the left side, there were either magic treasures, formations, restrictions, divine talismans, puppet beasts, and so on. However, on the right side, there were piles of materials and tools needed for refining. This was actually the second stage of the test? Yi Xian was extremely astonished. It had to be known that this was the first time Yi Xian had encountered such a test. The most important thing was that it was so comprehensive. This second stage was simply to test the profession of the person who entered. If he wanted to enter the next platform, he would have to refine the items on the platform he was standing on. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. Yi Xian really didn't have anything to worry about regarding his secondary profession. After all, in reality, his secondary profession could be considered very comprehensive. Even if he didn't understand much, there was still the system. Yi Xian stood on the first platform. On top of it was a pill, and the refining materials were all prepared. 2 chances. Yi Xian had 2 chances to refine that pill. What would the result be if he failed? Yi Xian didn't even consider it because he knew that he would definitely pass. In fact, in Yi Xian's heart, this was no different from giving away treasures. This was because no matter what Yi Xian refined, with the help of the system, he would succeed in one go. As for the remaining materials, wouldn't that mean that Yi Xian would have all of them? There were no rules here, saying that the remaining materials could not be taken away. Azure Sky Pill? Trash pills. Yi Xian casually glanced at the pill and casually waved his hand. Countless materials were quickly processed by him at the same time. In the blink of an eye, he had already successfully passed. On the second platform, Yi Xian was still too lazy to take another look at refining a divine armament. This was because it was too simple. One platform after another was continuously broken by Yi Xian, but as he walked forward, the requirements became higher and higher. However, this was all within Yi Xian's expectations. It would be strange if all the platform's tests were of the same level. Until the last platform. At this moment, when Yi Xian stood on the last platform, he couldn't help but smile. This test was really interesting because there was actually nothing on the last platform. All there was an altar. The meaning of this test couldn't be more obvious. He was going to take out the resources he had accumulated from the previous platforms and then refine something of the highest quality. If he passed, then he would pass. If he didn't, then he would stay. Yi Xian couldn't help but think that if there really was a genius that passed through these platforms, but didn't have the ability or didn't care about those materials, then what kind of expression would they have when they reached the last platform? The person who designed this second stage of the test really knew how to scheme. Of course, all of this was impossible for Yi Xian. With a thought, Yi Xian directly had the system choose the method to refine the highest quality magic treasure at the lowest price. This was a divine talisman. An ancient divine talisman. To be precise, it was one of the 10 great ancient ancestral talismans of the divine talisman race. The reason he chose this divine talisman was very simple. It was because his quality was already qualified, and the materials he needed were the least. Yi Xian spent 4 hours. With the help of the system, he finally refined the divine talisman and placed it on the altar. The only thing left to do was to wait. Whether or not he could pass the test, he could only wait. Of course, Yi Xian also had a worry in his heart. He was worried that there was no longer anyone in charge of this place. If that was the case, then no matter what kind of powerful thing Yi Xian refined, he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Fortunately, the appearance of a ray of light dispelled Yi Xian's doubts. This light constantly twisted and turned in the sky, making it impossible for people to know where its source was. However, it gave Yi Xian the feeling that the light seemed to be a formation. The light shone on the divine talisman that Yi Xian had refined, as if it was analyzing it. A moment later, a medallion suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. However, when Yi Xian saw the words on the medallion, he was slightly astonished. Proof of identity of a low-level trial taker. It was only a few short words. What Yi Xian cared about wasn't the sudden appearance of the medallion, but the 3 words low-level trial taker on it. One had to know that there were probably not many people in the entire God realm who could refine the 10 great ancient divine talismans of the divine talisman race. Even the divine talisman race themselves might not be able to refine them. However, Yi Xian had only obtained the identity of a beginner trial taker by using this item to pass the test. Then, what did a high-level trial taker need in order to pass? At this moment, Yi Xian instantly understood the era that the second secret realm was originally in. It was likely that Yi Xian had unintentionally entered an ancient secret realm. This was an ancient secret realm. A legendary existence. Not to mention Yi Xian, even the Kunlun Divine Domain's Divine Master, Mi Yu, didn't know if they had the fortune to enter an ancient secret realm. Who would have thought that this time, Yi Xian would actually enter an ancient secret realm? Although Yi Xian didn't have enough reason to prove his guess. Chapter 2832. Overlapping coexisting space. At the same time that Yi Xian was overjoyed, he was also quite worried. The power of the ancient era was simply too powerful. It was an era that belonged to legends. At that time, there were countless experts. Then, was it a blessing or a curse for Yi Xian to enter the ancient era's test? However, whether it was a blessing or a curse, he couldn't avoid it. Now that Yi Xian had already reached this step, there was no room for maneuver. Other than bracing himself and continuing on, he had no other choice. After all, the path he came from had already disappeared. The only choice left for Yi Xian was to advance. Suddenly, a ray of light suddenly focused on Yi Xian's body. Before Yi Xian could even react, he discovered that he was being forcefully teleported. It was different from the teleportation array. After all, the teleportation array allowed one to choose their own target and then teleport. As for the teleportation of this light, it was a mysterious force that enveloped Yi Xian, as if it wanted to bring him somewhere. Yi Xian didn't know where he was going to bring Yi Xian, but he knew that it was best not to try to defend against it. Since he already understood that the second secret realm was a trial ground, then why would Yi Xian need to defend against it? Very quickly, Yi Xian appeared in front of a palace. And this was the third stage. Yi Xian carefully observed the palace in front of him. The style of this palace was clearly different from any of the buildings Yi Xian had seen in the God realm. This was a palace that was built towards the ground. It was as if a huge hole had been dug out and then built layer by layer. However, the key point was that there was an independent floating space on each level. Once Yi Xian entered a certain level, he would actually be in a floating space that was like a floating island. Yi Xian could clearly see the entrance to the next level. If he didn't use his spiritual will, then Yi Xian would really be walking down the stairs step by step. However, once his spiritual will was released, what Yi Xian saw through it was a huge continent. On these continents, there were birds and beasts, as well as countless buildings. Overlapping space. Moreover, unlike other overlapping spaces, this overlapping space was also a coexisting space. If Yi Xian wanted to go to any space, he didn't need to make any unnecessary movements. He only needed to switch the way he saw it. Looking with one's eyes and looking with one's spiritual will were two completely different concepts. What if I don't use my eyes, and I don't use my spiritual will? Suddenly, Yi Xian thought of this possibility. Thus, he closed his eyes and closed his spiritual will, hoping to use his own body to feel it. Yi Xian's body suddenly stiffened. Sure enough, it was another overlapped space. Once he didn't use his eyes or spiritual will to look, Yi Xian's body seemed to be in a cage that was sealed on all sides. No matter which direction Yi Xian went in, he would only be able to take 3 steps at most before hitting a wall. Just how many layers are there in this overlapping space? Yi Xian was overwhelmed with shock. At the same time, he was incomparably puzzled. Whether it was an overlapping space or a coexisting space, it was already very young. However, Yi Xian had never seen an overlapping space before. Wait a minute, if the time is different, will there be a change? Yi Xian couldn't help but think. Yi Xian didn't comprehend the laws of time, but that didn't mean that the system couldn't do it. After paying a certain price, Yi Xian gave himself the chance to use the laws of time for 1 second. In the next second, Yi Xian only allowed himself to use the laws of time to enter the next second. Sure enough, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically because he discovered that once he used the power of the laws of time, the overlapping space would also change at the same time. In other words, this place was simply a mysterious existence with countless overlapping spaces and coexisting spaces. Yi Xian had enough reason to believe that such a method had long since been lost in the God realm. To be able to possess such a method, then it could only be from the ancient times. Moreover, it was an expert from the ancient times. Just what kind of place had Yi Xian entered? Just what kind of unknown awaited him? At this moment, even Yi Xian didn't have the slightest bit of confidence. He was even considering whether or not he should continue forward. However, even if Yi Xian regretted it, he didn't have the chance because all paths of retreat had already been sealed. Yi Xian only had one choice: to continue forward. Yi Xian didn't know what was waiting for him in front of him. However, the only thing he was sure of was that if it was a fortuitous encounter, it would definitely be a great one. Of course, if it was dangerous, it would definitely be a great crisis. This was because this place was simply too special. Yi Xian originally thought that there would be some sort of test in the third stage, so he carefully advanced. It could be said that he was thinking about every step he took. However, Yi Xian never imagined that there wouldn't be any tests in the third stage. Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In this stage, there really was a corridor. It wasn't until Yi Xian arrived at the bottom level that he realized this. At this moment, when Yi Xian stood on the lowest level of the platform, he revealed a helpless expression. It was just a corridor, why did it have to be so miraculous? Causing Yi Xian to be extremely careful and on edge. At this moment, there were two doors in front of Yi Xian. However, what surprised Yi Xian was that these two doors weren't the doors that people usually saw, but the Gate of Law. This door was completely constructed from the laws. If Yi Xian didn't already know about the uniqueness of this place, he might even suspect that it was formed naturally. It could be said that the form of this door was no different from an ordinary door. However, there was a huge difference in appearance. From time to time, there would be flashes of light above the door. That light was the light of law. Yi Xian could clearly see the light of law, and he could also clearly feel the power of law within the light. However, Yi Xian fell into deep thought as to how to open the Gate of Law. The two gates of law had different powers of law. Moreover, one had to think about which door to enter. System, detect what the power of law is in those two doors. Yi Xian said to the system. If he wanted to make a choice, then he had to first understand what law it was. Ding! System notification. The law gate on the left is the law of life, healing, and recovery. Ding! System notification. The law gate on the right is the law of darkness, and abyss. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Each door had the power of 3 laws. However, it was obvious that these 3 laws had a certain degree of coherence and were opposed to each other. Chapter 28:33. Ancient Ruins. Yi Xian didn't hesitate much and directly chose the door on the left. It could be said that if one chose the door on the right, they would possess the power of the laws of darkness, and the abyss. In that case, they would possess an extremely powerful concealment ability and a certain amount of combat strength. As for the law gate on the left, it had a strong ability to continue fighting. Yi Xian didn't know if walking into the law gate meant that he would be able to possess such a power of law. However, as long as there was a slight possibility, Yi Xian would choose it. When he arrived at the door, Yi Xian was somewhat worried. He didn't know how to push open the door. It was impossible to directly walk in, and it was also impossible to push or pull. Then what should he do? After pondering for a moment, he realized that he had no clue. Yi Xian didn't care about it and directly extended his hand. In just an instant, Yi Xian clearly felt the powerful power of the laws. It felt as though the power of 3 types of laws was entwined in his hand. Yi Xian didn't grasp any of these laws. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't use any of them. Instead, he started to comprehend them with his heart. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to host for comprehending the law of life. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to host for comprehending the law of healing. Ding! System notification. Congratulations to host for comprehending the law of recovery. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. For 3 months, Yi Xian remained motionless in that position. But along with the system's notification, Yi Xian woke up. At this moment, Yi Xian was rather excited. After all, it was difficult for him to not be excited after comprehending 3 types of law energy at once. One had to know that in the outside world, not to mention 3 types of law energy, even if it was just one type of law energy, and it was just a chance to comprehend it, it would still cause a battle. But at this moment, Yi Xian was actually able to comprehend it so easily. There was no danger, and it didn't even take too much time. Could it be that this was the reward? Yi Xian couldn't help but think in his heart. After all, everything that had happened now couldn't allow Yi Xian to not go in this direction. After all, this surprise was simply too great. After grasping the power of these 3 laws, Yi Xian naturally knew the way to enter the Gate of Laws. Actually, this Gate of Laws was just an existence equivalent to a filter. Those who possessed the power of 3 laws at the same time could directly enter. Therefore, the current Yi Xian only needed to raise his foot and enter. Of course, it was simple for Yi Xian, but if it were anyone else, it wouldn't be so simple. Yi Xian possessed an eternal bloodline, and he'd also activated a special talent. Yi Xian could comprehend any law. As long as Yi Xian was given the chance and time, then no matter what law it was, Yi Xian would be able to grasp it. However, others couldn't. Generally speaking, no matter how talented you were, it was impossible for you to possess too many laws at the same time. This was because there was a mutually exclusive relationship between the laws. Moreover, it wasn't just a specific rejection, but a complete rejection. If it was an ordinary person, if they comprehended the power of a law, they might be able to develop a branch of the power of a law. However, if they wanted to comprehend the power of other laws, it would be extremely difficult. It was even more impossible to comprehend a mutually exclusive power. Only Yi Xian's special bloodline, could possess such a miraculous ability. He could ignore the rules of the laws and comprehend any power of the laws at will. When Yi Xian walked into the Gate of Laws, what he saw caused him to be incomparably shocked. 3 halls. There were only 3 halls here. When Yi Xian entered, there was also a huge stone tablet. He didn't know what material the stone tablet was made of, but he was sure that it was definitely not ordinary. This was because in this secret realm that had existed for tens of thousands of years, the fact that the stone tablet was still able to maintain its undamaged appearance meant that it was special. There were ancient words recorded on the stone tablet. It could be said that there weren't many people in the current god realm that knew these words. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know them either. System, what is written on this stone tablet? Fortunately, Yi Xian didn't need to get to know him. Ding, system prompt, data collection in progress. Ding, system prompt, text analysis in progress. Ding, analysis successful. Does the host wish to check it immediately? Of course he had to check. There were no creatures or records in this secret realm. This stone tablet could be considered the only record that Yi Xian could find. Very quickly, the words were translated. Only after Yi Xian saw it did he know where this place was. Only then did he know what kind of existence this place was. The stone tablet recorded that in ancient times, there were countless experts. Naturally, there were also countless sections. The righteous and evil forces were the same. This secret realm was originally just a secret realm that wasn't too strange, but because of a war, it became quite strange. The Nature Divine Palace and the Darkness Divine Palace had always been 2 opposing forces. Perhaps in terms of strength, the strength of the 2 divine palaces was not too outstanding, but they also had their own uniqueness. Because of the disagreement in their ideals, the 2 divine palaces had been fighting for millions of years before the twilight of the gods. The stone tablet recorded the last battle. Unfortunately, it wasn't a war between the 2 divine palaces. Instead, a mysterious organization attacked the 2 divine palaces at the same time for the 2 ancient weapons that the 2 divine palaces were guarding. Who would have thought that the 2 opposing forces that had been fighting for millions of years would join forces to fight against the enemy? Unfortunately, the enemy was too strong. Even if the 2 divine palaces joined forces, they wouldn't be able to defeat them. Powerhouses fell one after another, and the 2 great shrines were in imminent danger. But at this time the protector appeared. There was no record of what the guardian was, but from their words, Yi Xian could tell that the 2 divine palaces and even the superpowers were incomparably afraid of the guardian. The guardian had mediated this war, but as the price, he had to take away 2 ancient weapons. The 2 divine halls naturally wouldn't be willing, so after some discussion, they activated the ancient weapons and sealed off the secret realm. It could be said that this was a choice of mutual destruction, and the truth was as such. Now that Yi Xian had arrived here, he couldn't see any more living people. This was the best example. The stone tablet recorded the uniqueness of this secret realm. It was that those who possessed the physique of complete laws could enter, but at the same time, they were also marked. In fact, Yi Xian could already feel 2 rays of light revolving around his divine deity, 1 black and 1 green. There was a forced contract on the stone tablet. Those who entered this place would obtain all the treasures of the 2 divine halls, but at the same time, they would also bear the responsibility of destroying the mysterious force. Of course, there was also the guardian. According to the contents of the contract, if Yi Xian couldn't do it within 10,000 years, then he would be devoured by the 2 rays of light and perish. Chapter 28:34. Supreme God, damn it! Could it be that these 2 so-called shrines have a collective mental disorder? Yi Xian said angrily after reading the contents of the stone tablet. In Yi Xian's eyes, the actions of these 2 shrines were truly too paranoid. They had placed all their hopes on the people who had entered. This was an extremely risky action. Who could guarantee that the people who entered would have the strength to defeat the 2 great powers? In that case, wouldn't it be more than dragging a genius to accompany them in death? Even in ancient times, he was definitely a rare genius with a physique that was full of laws. Furthermore, having 2 shackles engraved on his divine deity was something that no one would be able to accept. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't have the chance to choose at all. Now that the matter was settled, the 2 shackles had silently formed from the moment Yi Xian entered the Gate of Laws. And this method was the legendary law contract. Yi Xian had once heard of the law contract. It was said that some experts could use some sort of secret technique to use the power of the laws to set up a contract that was supervised by the laws. Once the contract was formed, it would automatically take effect. The result of violating the contract was that the power of the laws would be stripped away, and it was even possible for the divine deity to shatter. However, this kind of method was, after all, a method that only a legendary expert possessed. Yi Xian just didn't expect that he would encounter a legendary law contract when he was only at the Divine King realm. One had to know that even the Divine Lord Miemo had never seen such power before. The law contract was no longer as simple as borrowing the power of the laws. It could only be done by communicating with the laws. It could be said that these were two different realms of existence. Generally speaking, that level was called the Supreme God. To be more precise, it should be the Supreme Divine Lord. Supreme Divine Lord. If Miemo could break through, then he would be able to enter that level. However, Yi Xian was only a mere God King. Moreover, he was only a Tier 1 God King, yet he had already come into contact with something on the level of a Supreme God. He didn't know whether Yi Xian should laugh or cry. Regardless of whether he cried or laughed, the outcome was already set in stone. Therefore, Yi Xian could only accept it. Yi Xian walked towards the hall step by step, cursing in his heart. To put it bluntly, this secret realm can only be entered by people with complete physiques of the laws. However, in order to confuse people, they created a few tests. What kind of contract is this? This is simply luring people in. The Shameless Nature Divine Palace, the Shameless Darkness Divine Palace, they actually used such a method to trick me. Yi Xian was extremely unwilling. After all, the actions of the two great halls were truly unworthy of their status as ancient experts. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was powerless to do anything. Fortunately, 10,000 years was enough for Yi Xian. After all, this was already something that happened in ancient times. In fact, it was possible that those two powers had already disappeared. Perhaps Yi Xian was just taking advantage of them for free. However, even now, Yi Xian didn't even know who the other force was apart from knowing that there was a guardian. This time, Yi Xian was rather confused when he searched for treasures in the secret realm. Soon, Yi Xian walked into the hall. There was no protection in the hall. It was obvious that everything here was waiting for Yi Xian to obtain it. However, only after Yi Xian entered did he realize that there wasn't anything important at all. Once one entered the hall, they would discover that the hall was actually divided into two in the middle. The so-called Nature Divine Palace and the Darkness Divine Palace had long since merged together. In other words, even if Yi Xian entered from the other side, he would still be here. The test of the Gate of Laws was only to test whether or not Yi Xian truly had a physique of the laws. Once one entered the hall, the most eye-catching thing was naturally the two ancient weapons in the hall. These two ancient hilts looked like long swords, but the material seemed to be ordinary stone. Of course, Yi Xian wouldn't believe that they were really two stone swords. If the two great halls were actually protecting two stone swords, then Yi Xian probably wouldn't believe anything he said. There was something strange about these two stone swords. Yi Xian directly walked over. After all, the two stone swords were specifically mentioned on the stone tablet, so it was obvious that they weren't ordinary. However, this time, Yi Xian ran into a wall. In front of the two stone swords, there was actually an invisible formation that prevented Yi Xian from approaching. The treasure was right in front of him, but Yi Xian couldn't walk over. This feeling was truly uncomfortable. Suddenly, a ray of light erupted from the two divine swords at the same time. At the same time, the door that Yi Xian entered closed with a bang. A ray of light shot in front of Yi Xian. Within the light, an aged voice sounded out. "You're finally here." These words seemed to mean that he'd waited for Yi Xian for a long time, but Yi Xian knew very well that this voice would probably say the same thing to anyone who entered this place. This was because Yi Xian could already tell that this was just a Dharma idol. Moreover, it was the kind of Dharma idol that didn't have any abilities and could only be used to transmit certain information. Sure enough, before Yi Xian could speak, the voice continued. "Fated person, for you to be able to come here, I believe you already know your mission. From the moment you walked in here, you no longer have a choice. Accepting the mission is your only choice, and in order to increase your strength, we used our last bit of strength to set up this ultimate examination. Fated person, please forgive us for having no choice but to treat you with caution. After all, you are our only hope. This hall, This secret realm will only accept one person, and you are our only hope. Fated person, from this moment onwards, if you want to leave, you can only pass our test. Please work hard for us and for yourself. At this moment, Yi Xian had the urge to curse because he seemed to have been forced to sign a law contract. Just now he was forced to sign a law contract, and now, he was forced to undergo some 6 tests. This kind of feeling was extremely unpleasant. However, Yi Xian couldn't do anything about it. After all, this was a secret realm set up by an ancient expert. With Yi Xian's current strength, how could he possibly do anything to it? Suddenly, the environment in front of Yi Xian slowly began to change. This wasn't teleportation. Yi Xian was very clear about this. It was an overlapping space. This place was actually also an overlapping space. At this moment, Yi Xian was still standing on the same spot without any changes. What changed was the surrounding environment. To be precise, it brought Yi Xian into another coexisting space. Chapter 28:35. Sudden attack. What exactly were the 6 tests? Yi Xian didn't know at the moment. Perhaps these 6 tests were referring to 6 different tests, or perhaps they were referring to the comprehensive test of the 6 types of law energy. Yi Xian didn't know. Therefore, Yi Xian could only wait. Fortunately, the wait didn't last too long. When the Dharma idol finally finished complaining and the overlapping space finally finished switching, Yi Xian began the first test. At this moment, the environment that Yi Xian was in was an extremely strange space. Around Yi Xian were numerous enormous mountains. Vaguely, one could see the luxurious palaces on the mountaintops. However, there was only one path in front of Yi Xian, a path that could only be walked. After entering the overlapping space, Yi Xian discovered that he couldn't fly at all. It wasn't that there was a restriction, or that there was some sort of suppression. Instead, here, it seemed to be just a flat surface. Simply put, in the outside world there was a height, but here there was no height. The so-called height was only the height that could be seen with the naked eye, but it could only be as high as it could be. It was impossible for it to rise any higher. Of course, this was also a restriction of the power of law. Two-dimensional power of law. It was an extremely rare type of power of law. Its effect was to transform length, width, and height into only length and width, without any height. In such a strange space, it was impossible for Yi Xian to be able to face it calmly without panicking at all. However, Yi Xian was very clear that no matter what he thought, there was one thing he could be sure of, and that was that he could only accept it. How could the ultimate test that the 2 great shrines had condensed with their final strength be that simple? It was almost impossible for Yi Xian to walk over with his current strength. Fated one, please move forward. Your first test is to walk through this path to the heavens. A voice rang out, indicating the beginning of the test. Yi Xian looked at the path in front of him, but he was slightly shocked in his heart. He was afraid that this path wouldn't be easy to walk on. Sure enough, when Yi Xian took his first step, a change immediately occurred. Suddenly, countless Dharma idols condensed on both sides of the so-called path to the heavens. These Dharma idols all appeared incomparably solemn, and their eyes were all locked onto Yi Xian. Yi Xian subconsciously stopped in his tracks. The feeling of being stared at by countless powerful gazes wasn't easy to bear. However, Yi Xian no longer had a choice. This was because after Yi Xian took his first step, the space behind him had already transformed into an endless void. All paths of retreat had been lost. Bracing himself, Yi Xian could only continue walking forward. The god-slaughtering sword was already in Yi Xian's hand. No matter what kind of unknown existence was in front of him, Yi Xian would still be able to pass through it. Roar! A loud roar sounded out. Dozens of divine beasts suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Their appearance was without any warning, but there was no doubt that their bodies were powerful. Hoo-hoo! As soon as these divine beasts appeared, they attacked without pause. From the mouths of each divine beast, powerful rays of light shot out. These rays of light were of different colors, but they all had one thing in common, and that was that they were incomparably powerful. Boom! 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 In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian had already fallen into danger. That powerful attack caused Yi Xian to have no choice but to dodge. This was because Yi Xian knew very well that any attack would be enough to take his life. At the same time, a yellow zone of light appeared in front of Yi Xian. Strangely, the attacks of the divine beasts didn't enter the yellow zone. Yi Xian was slightly shocked at first, but then he fell into doubt. What was going on? If those divine beasts wanted to attack him, why wouldn't he attack when he was in the yellow zone? If it wasn't an attack, then such powerful rays of light couldn't be for Yi Xian to see, right? What was going on? For a moment, Yi Xian was unable to react. System, detect the situation here. What's so special about this place? Helpless, Yi Xian could only ask the system. Ding! System prompt. Please note, the current conditions are insufficient. The system is unable to determine. Insufficient conditions? Yi Xian slightly frowned. Yi Xian understood what the system meant. Simply put, Yi Xian didn't provide any valid data to the system at all, so the system had no way of determining what was going on. Now that the system couldn't be counted on, who else could Yi Xian count on? It seemed that Yi Xian was the only one who could continue this test. However, how was he going to deal with this? The powerful attack made Yi Xian very clear that he was powerless to resist it head-on. He couldn't possibly be trapped here forever, right? Suddenly, Yi Xian raised his brows because he discovered something special. The attacks of these divine beasts seemed to be fixed. Moreover, although countless divine beasts interweaved and attacked, there would always be a gap between them. Could it be that the test this time was to test one's dodging ability? Yi Xian was in disbelief. After all, if it really was this kind of test, then it would be too simple. However, Yi Xian couldn't find any other reasonable explanation, so he could only continue according to his own thoughts. Of course, was it really as simple as Yi Xian thought? Was this test of dodging really that easy, as Yi Xian thought? This was a test created by the two great shrines. Even if this was only the first stage, it definitely couldn't be described with two simple words. After waiting for a moment, Yi Xian finally prepared to give it a try according to his own thoughts. Yi Xian's figure moved as he quickly charged out. In the beginning, it was just as Yi Xian had thought. He only needed to dodge through the gaps between the attacks. Indeed, from the looks of it, this test wasn't difficult at all. However, as Yi Xian continued, he realized that the difficulty was at the back. As Yi Xian walked forward on the endless path to the heavens, divine beasts continuously appeared and launched attacks. At this moment, Yi Xian finally saw it clearly. It turned out that this so-called divine beast was also a Dharma idol. Although they looked lifelike on the surface, they were indeed just Dharma idols constructed from energy. Powerful divine beast Dharma idols continuously appeared, and the moment they appeared, they would launch violent attacks. Moreover, they would only appear when Yi Xian arrived at a suitable location. Chapter 2836. The new use of divine deity. Moreover, the attacks at the start were fixed, but the subsequent attacks were moving. In other words, Yi Xian had to find a suitable dodging route in the shortest amount of time, then run forward as fast as he could. After all, regardless of whether he didn't find a suitable route or if his movements were slightly slower, Yi Xian would suffer a berserk attack. That attack was fatal. Yi Xian's figure continuously dodged. Fortunately, because there were two-dimensional laws here, Yi Xian only needed to dodge left and right without paying attention to his height. However, dodging left and right wasn't that simple. Sometimes, Yi Xian needed to adjust his body more than 10 times in the blink of an eye in order to dodge one attack after another. Suddenly, just as Yi Xian was about to dodge another attack, a violent pressure descended onto Yi Xian's body. There wasn't the slightest sign of the pressure appearing. Although the pressure wasn't too powerful, it was a sudden eruption that caused Yi Xian to suffer a small loss. It even caused Yi Xian's body to uncontrollably retreat a little. It was just a little distance, but it actually caused Yi Xian to almost die. That was because a berserk attack had descended upon them from that small distance. Fortunately, Yi Xian reacted in time and stabilized his figure. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would still be heavily injured. The consequences of being heavily injured on the path to heaven could be imagined. At that moment, Yi Xian was so shocked that he broke out in cold sweat. In a short moment, Yi Xian had actually brushed shoulders with death. How dangerous was this? However, Yi Xian had no choice but to continue forward. This was because every time he took a step forward, a distance would disappear behind him. It felt as if Yi Xian was only at his original spot. It wasn't that Yi Xian was moving, but that the path to the heavens was constantly approaching Yi Xian. Yi Xian was on high alert. How could he dare to relax in the slightest? This was something related to Yi Xian's life, so he couldn't afford to joke around. He advanced all the way. It could even be said that it was a hopeless advance, because after all, you didn't know how far you still had to go. The path to the heavens seemed to have no end at all. The pressure that erupted from time to time seemed to be reminding Yi Xian to be careful and vigilant at all times. These pressures appeared without any warning, but as long as Yi Xian was the slightest bit careless, what awaited him wouldn't be that simple. Forward. Forward. There was no end to it, no end to it. Yi Xian didn't know how long he'd been moving forward, nor did he know how many attacks he dodged. Was it 10 days? Or was it 20 days? But in the end, Yi Xian walked through this terrifying path to the heavens. No, perhaps, it couldn't be considered as walking. At most, it could only be considered as passing through the first section of the journey. At this moment, a yellow area appeared beneath Yi Xian's feet. This yellow area allowed Yi Xian to understand that he was temporarily safe and could rest for a while. Suddenly, a ray of light descended from the sky. Wrapped within the light was an incomparably huge stone sculpture. The sculpture seemed to be a strange half-human, half-beast existence. The sculpture was lifelike. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care about the sculpture itself, but the thing in the sculpture's hand. It was a bottle, and it was unknown what it was made of. Inside the bottle, one could clearly see a ball of light. With just a glance, Yi Xian was able to tell what the light represented. A complete divine deity. Inside the bottle, there was actually a complete divine deity. System, what is that? Yi Xian subconsciously asked the system. Ding! System prompt, target, first-rate divine deity. What do you mean? First-grade divine deity? Could it be that divine deity was divine deity? Wasn't divine deity just divine deity? At most, it was just because of the difference in realms. Why would there be a first-rate divine deity? Yi Xian was greatly astonished. He couldn't help but ask the system, System, what is this first-rate divine deity? What is it used for? Ding! System prompt. Divine deity represents a person's potential. The stronger and purer the divine deity, the higher this person's potential will be. Divine deity represents divine potential? This was the first time Yi Xian had heard of such a thing. Yi Xian had been in the god realm for such a long time, but he'd never heard of divine deity being differentiated. Thus, Yi Xian was completely confused. Fortunately, the system's prompt didn't end. Just as Yi Xian was puzzled, the system's prompt continued to ring. Ding! System prompt. Host, please note, the division of divine deity is similar to the title of the crown, but the title of the crown increases the host's combat strength, while the level of divine deity increases the host's potential. Hearing the system's reply, although Yi Xian had a simple understanding of the use of divine deity, this didn't mean that Yi Xian had completely resolved his doubts. System, but why didn't I know about this before? Moreover, even if divine deity has such a use, why is it that no one would have any ideas about other people's divine deity? Ding! System notification. Host, please note, the division of divine deity has been lost since the ancient times, and only places like the ancient secret realms can have some records. And seizing other people's divine deity to strengthen one's own divine deity only exists in the paramount god realm. The system's answer answered Yi Xian's doubts. It wasn't that no one knew the level of divine deity. It could be said that the level of divine deity had always been there, but it was impossible for ordinary people to know. To put it simply, there was no longer any division of godhood in the divine world. That was because the legacies of godhood had been severed. Only in some arcana realms could one learn about the division of godhood, such as this second arcana realm. After all, this second secret realm, strictly speaking, was an ancient secret realm. Therefore, it was normal for him to know about the level of divine deity in the second secret realm. At this moment, Yi Xian actually felt lucky in his heart. After all, it was fortunate that Yi Xian knew about this news ahead of time. One had to know that since there were levels of divine deity, and now, such a divine deity had appeared as a reward on the path to the heavens. Obviously, the divine deity of others could also be used to strengthen their own divine deity. If Yi Xian didn't know about this, then one day, he wouldn't even know that someone was thinking about his divine deity. Moreover, even if he obtained the divine deity, he wouldn't know how to use it. This time, Yi Xian could be considered lucky, but it wasn't a bad thing. Chapter 28:37. Soul-devouring sword god. Of course, there were still a lot of things that Yi Xian didn't know about, and there were naturally a lot of things that were even more terrifying than stripping away divine deity. However, Yi Xian hadn't come into contact with them yet. System, what's the use of this divine deity? Yi Xian asked the system. Since this divine deity was given to him as a reward, then it meant that it was something that could strengthen him. Ding, system notification, host, please note, absorbing the divine deity without an owner can strengthen your own divine deity. Ding, system notification, if you want to obtain the divine deity without an owner, then you can kill the enemy and forcefully strip the enemy's will before the enemy's divine deity shatters, thus preserving the complete divine deity. Ding, system notification, divine deity stripper, is a special profession from the ancient times, but it has now been lost. Was it lost? Yi Xian slightly frowned. He didn't know if the system was talking about the entire God Realm or if it was just the God Realm continent. If it was the God Realm continent, then would there still be such a person in those ancient and mysterious secret realms? Just thinking about it made Yi Xian feel incomparably terrified. What kind of feeling would it be to forcefully strip away a person's will? Previously, Yi Xian knew that the result of the divine deity shattering would be his death. In fact, during battle, breaking the opponent's divine deity was the most effective method of attack. But now the system told Yi Xian that the divine deity didn't need to be destroyed, but directly stripped away. Moreover, once it was stripped out, it could be used as a cultivation method. So it turned out that for the sake of cultivation, he really did everything he could. He didn't know how many more methods were waiting for Yi Xian to discover. Of course, it might be even more terrifying. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still absorbed the divine deity. Not to mention anything else, Yi Xian was sure that this divine deity was probably left behind by an expert millions of years ago. Perhaps that person was once an expert, but who would have thought that millions of years later, he would become Yi Xian's reward? After absorbing the divine deity, Yi Xian didn't discover anything unusual, and his strength didn't increase in the slightest. Something like potential was not something that could be seen or touched. It could only be used when needed. Afterwards, Yi Xian didn't delay any longer and directly walked forward. After all, no one knew how many more tests were waiting for Yi Xian. Staying where he was wasn't a solution at all. Step by step, he originally thought that there would be another test, but Yi Xian discovered that there was actually nothing. For a moment, Yi Xian relaxed a little. However, just when Yi Xian was at his most relaxed, an attack suddenly arrived. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom! A violent force instantly sent Yi Xian flying. It was fortunate that the god-slaughtering armor had always been on Yi Xian's body, so it was able to offset a portion of the attack. However, even the system didn't have time to warn him of this attack. It could be seen how fast it was. At the same time, a white figure appeared in front of the path to heaven. So weak. The white figure spoke. This was the first thing Yi Xian had heard that could speak since entering the second secret realm. Something? Yes, he was not a human, nor was he a beast. He was actually a mechanical puppet. Yi Xian had seen quite a few puppets, but he couldn't help but sigh at this mechanical puppet. It was truly a marvelous work of art. This puppet was made from the most common type of divine wood, but it was exceptionally detailed. Even every strand of hair was vivid and lifelike. You must be the person who came to take the exam. I've been waiting for you for a long time, but I didn't expect you to be so weak. Go back, you have no chance of passing my test. The puppet opened its mouth to speak, but Yi Xian wasn't happy with the meaning behind its words. He never thought that Yi Xian would actually be looked down upon by a puppet. What was a puppet? It was simply a man-made object. No matter how lifelike it was, after all, an object without a soul. But Yi Xian was being looked down upon by a puppet. How could Yi Xian feel good? That was simply a lie. System, detect this guy's strength for me. Yi Xian was infuriated as he directly asked the system. Ding! System prompt, designated target, no realm. No realm? Yi Xian was slightly stunned. What did this not mean? Without a realm, he could repel Yi Xian in one move? Yi Xian didn't believe it, but the system wouldn't lie at all. In that case, it was obvious that the problem lay with the puppet. This puppet seemed as though it had some sort of unique methods. Yi Xian frowned. He paused for a moment, then ignored the puppet. Instead, he pulled out the god-slaughtering sword and charged out. This time, Yi Xian didn't use Wei Zhentian. After all, if he couldn't even take care of a puppet, and a puppet that didn't even have a cultivation base, then it would be a little unreasonable. Die! Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. The immense power caused a whirlwind to spring up on the path to heaven. Unfortunately, it was useless. The puppet actually ignored Yi Xian's attack. This was the first time the invincible god-slaughtering sword had encountered something that couldn't be destroyed at all. Yi Xian's fierce strike only left a white mark on the puppet's body. So hard. What exactly was this thing made of? Could it be that it was really just an ordinary divine wood? Impossible. How could an ordinary divine wood be so hard? Yi Xian seemed to be talking to himself as he spoke. However, at the same time Yi Xian spoke, the puppet also spoke. It's actually just a little fellow who hasn't even broken through to the Divine Lord stage. No wonder he's so weak. Little fellow, this isn't a place you can come to. You should go back quickly. Once again he was despised. Yi Xian was despised by a puppet once again. Damn it! Yi Xian was incomparably furious. Go back, if only he could go back. Right now, Yi Xian didn't have a choice at all. He could either fight and clear all the way, or he could be trapped here to death. Wei Zhentian. Magic treasure form. Attack. Thousand Beast Sword Attendant. Flower God Sword Attendant. Kill him. In an instant, Yi Xian waved his hand and unleashed his strongest attack. This was because Yi Xian knew very well that this puppet wasn't that easy to deal with. Of course, at the same time as he released the sword attendants and Wei Zhentian, Yi Xian also used other methods. Dharma Idol. Yes, Yi Xian had obtained several Dharma idols, and now, Yi Xian had no choice but to use his Dharma idol to attack. I am free and unfettered, looking down on the divine continent. In the heavens, only the sword can kill souls. Soul-devouring sword god Dharma idol, come out. Chapter 2838. Thousand Beast Sword Attendant Promotion. At this moment, Yi Xian directly used the soul-devouring sword god's Dharma idol. In an instant, a huge circle of light appeared around Yi Xian's body. At the same time that the soul-devouring sword god's Dharma idol was activated, it was as if a huge shadow had surrounded Yi Xian. This time, the Dharma idol was attached to his body. This was because Yi Xian knew very well that the soul-devouring sword god's Dharma idol was different from the other Dharma idols. Not to mention the enemy, even Yi Xian's own soul would be affected. Why did he choose the soul-devouring sword god's Dharma idol? Because according to Yi Xian's analysis, this puppet probably already had a soul. The biggest difference between a puppet and a human was that it didn't have a soul. Humans had souls, and other living beings also had souls. However, there were no puppets. Therefore, puppets would only carry out certain specific tasks according to their master's wishes. But now there were no longer any living people in the secret realm, yet this puppet was carrying out its mission. It even made its own judgment and felt that Yi Xian's strength wasn't enough, so it let Yi Xian leave. Obviously, this puppet already had a soul. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know how many souls it had. However, Yi Xian didn't care about this at all. As long as he knew that this puppet had a soul, then it would be easy to deal with it. It could be said that facing such a powerful puppet, using the soul as an attack point was Yi Xian's best and only chance. The soul-devouring sword god's Dharma idol restrained the soul, so Yi Xian used the soul-devouring sword god. Kill! Yi Xian suddenly attacked with his sword. On the surface, this attack didn't seem to be much different from before. But this time, the puppet was clearly shocked. It didn't dare to dodge like Yi Xian did when he attacked. Instead, it directly dodged far away. What kind of method is this? Why do I feel so scared? The puppet had already jumped away when it moved, but it still asked Yi Xian curiously. Little things, you don't have the qualifications to participate in the trial. Get out of my way. Before Yi Xian could answer the puppet's question, the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant, the Flower God Sword Attendant, and the 100 Flowers Flower God attacked first. However, this did not arouse the puppet's vigilance at all. Instead, with a casual wave of his hand, a violent force actually swept away the god rank mounts, the 100 Flowers Flower God, and the 1,000 Beast Sword Attendant and the Flower God Sword Attendant. There was no way to resist. In front of this puppet, a powerful god rank mount didn't even have the slightest ability to resist. As for the puppet, it didn't seem to realize just how much shock it had brought Yi Xian. At this moment, Its eyes were still blinking as it looked at Yi Xian. It was obvious that it was waiting for Yi Xian's reply. What a terrifying puppet. Just what was this guy made of? How could he be so powerful? What should he do? It seemed that all of Yi Xian's methods were useless against this puppet. Yi Xian didn't even need to make a move to know that it was impossible for him to defeat this puppet. However, if he didn't defeat this puppet, it meant that Yi Xian wouldn't be able to continue forward. There was only one final result, and that was to be trapped here to death. What should he do? Yi Xian quickly thought about it. Feeling the power of the soul-devouring sword god on his body, Yi Xian's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His face even revealed an expression of ecstasy. Perhaps, this wasn't a test for Yi Xian at all, but a reward for him. Whether it was the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant or the Flower God Sword Attendant. Actually, Yi Xian had long since discovered that they couldn't keep up with Yi Xian's footsteps. At the very least, before they strengthened it, they couldn't keep up with Yi Xian's current footsteps. In that case, the best way to solve this problem was to strengthen the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant. There were many ways to strengthen the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant. However, why did he have to strengthen the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant itself? If the soul on this puppet was destroyed, wouldn't that mean that the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant would be able to occupy the puppet's body? If it succeeded, then how much would the strength of the Thousand Hand Sword Attendant increase by? It could be said to have increased by more than 10 million times. How could Yi Xian not be overjoyed? Although he didn't know what this puppet was made of, Yi Xian at least knew that the material of his body was extremely special and powerful. And the soul-devouring sword god had a special ability called Soul Battle. The name of the Soul Battle divine ability was simple, and its meaning was also very simple. It was used to allow the souls of two designated targets to fight against each other. This was a method used by the soul-devouring sword god to deal with enemies. Moreover, enemies were often able to escape this kind of control. One had to know that once the enemy saw through it, they would naturally not be able to fight. However, Yi Xian now had a new method of using it. He wanted to fight the soul of the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant with the soul of the puppet, and he wanted the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant to seize the puppet's body. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't have the slightest bit of depression from before. All that was left in his heart was ecstasy. In fact, Yi Xian even thought to himself, "I've picked up a treasure. This time I've picked up a treasure." Wasn't that so? Yi Xian had definitely picked up a treasure this time. Once the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant succeeded, it could be said that the effect would be better than leveling up several times. Without any hesitation, Yi Xian naturally knew that the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant would definitely not go against him. He was afraid that the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant would be extremely happy in his heart. Yi Xian had gambled this round. In any case, even if he failed, Yi Xian wouldn't suffer a greater loss. After all, if he failed, it was very likely that Yi Xian would be trapped here for who knew how long. Thousand Beast Sword Attendant, are you ready? Yi Xian lightly asked with a smile on his face. The Thousand Beast Sword Attendant nodded. He naturally understood Yi Xian's thoughts. Since everything was ready, Yi Xian didn't stop. Soul of the soul, soul of the soul, thousands of reincarnations, revolving and unbreakable. Yi Xian chanted an incantation and launched an attack. He didn't know what era this soul-devouring sword god was from, but he still had to chant an incantation to activate a divine ability. However, Yi Xian didn't care about this. After all, the most important thing for Yi Xian right now was to wait for the outcome of the battle. As Yi Xian activated his Dharma Idol ability, the bodies of the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant and the puppet stiffened at the same time, not moving an inch. Obviously, the two of them were engaged in a battle of souls. Yi Xian couldn't see what that kind of battle was, so he could only wait silently. 2 hours. Another 2 hours. Day after day, Yi Xian didn't care about how long had passed. But finally the result was out. The Thousand Beast Swordsman suddenly moved and fell to the ground. As for the puppet, it moved its limbs and stood up. Could it be that the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant failed? Yi Xian was shocked. However, the system didn't indicate that the Thousand Beast Sword Attendant had died, so Yi Xian didn't give up. Instead, he closely stared at the puppet. Suddenly, the puppet moved and charged towards Yi Xian. Greetings, Master. Chapter 2839. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He had succeeded, he had really succeeded. He had actually used such a method to defeat the puppet, and had even found a new body for the Thousand Beast Sword Servant. Ding! System notification. Host, please note, the Thousand Beast Sword Servant has evolved into a Divine Wood Sword Servant due to special opportunities. All of the Thousand Beast Sword Servant's original abilities have disappeared, and it has obtained the Divine Wood Sword Servant's exclusive abilities. Infinite Defense, Infinite Growth, Infinite Resurrection. Infinite Defense. The Divine Wood Sword Servant can expand or shrink all of its defense at will. However, as the area of defense increases, the defense power will weaken. Infinite Growth. The Divine Wood Sword Servant's original body is a divine wood, so it can cultivate on its own, but the speed is extremely slow. Infinite Resurrection. The Divine Wood Sword Servant has the special ability to revive a withered tree. Even if it dies completely, as long as there is a little bit of its body left, it can instantly revive. F***CK. Yi Xian couldn't help but curse. This Divine Wood Sword Servant seemed to be even stronger than the Thousand Beast Sword Servant from before, especially in terms of defense. Although these three skills seem to be nothing special, in reality, Yi Xian was very clear about how abnormal these three abilities were. Being able to control the range of his defense according to his will was equivalent to allowing Yi Xian to have a map of his defense. The key was that even if this defense was broken, it could immediately recover. Of course, perhaps after recovering, it would be a little weaker for a short period of time. However, just how powerful was the defense of the Divine Wood Sword Servant's puppet? Yi Xian had personally experienced it, and even the god's slaughtering sword was unable to harm it in the slightest. Could it be that its defense wasn't strong enough? Moreover, this fellow could cultivate and evolve on his own. Although it was a little slow, there was at least some hope. In the future, Yi Xian might be able to obtain a fortuitous encounter to increase the speed of the Divine Wood Sword Servant's improvement. Speaking of which, could it be that this didn't prove how powerful the Divine Wood Sword Servant was? Of course, it was a pity that the Thousand Beast Sword Servant's previous abilities had all disappeared. However, compared to obtaining a new ability, Yi Xian didn't care much about the ability to disappear. In any case, the god rank mount didn't disappear. Instead, it returned to Yi Xian's hands. Thinking about it, the Thousand Beast Sword Servant actually didn't lose much of its abilities. At this moment, Yi Xian was incomparably delighted, but he had no choice but to continue forward. After all, it was impossible for Yi Xian to be trapped here forever. There were no obstructions along the way. That puppet was basically the only way out of this place. Yi Xian's method of passing the trial might be a little suspicious of cheating, but after all, as long as he could pass, then no matter what method he used, there was nothing worth caring about. Here, Yi Xian once again obtained a first-rate divine deity. Of course, Yi Xian also absorbed it. Who knew if he would ever encounter a complete divine deity in the future? The current battle was all about breaking the opponent's divine deity and causing the opponent to completely perish. It seemed like the divine realm continent no longer had such a method. Thus, to Yi Xian, it would be a waste not to absorb such a complete divine deity. After passing 2 trials in a row, Yi Xian's mood relaxed quite a bit. It seemed that the 2 Divine Halls tests were ultimately meant to strengthen Yi Xian. Unfortunately, the tests set up by the 2 Divine Halls seemed to be too high level. Perhaps they didn't expect that a person with a physique that was full of laws would actually be someone who hadn't even broken through to the Divine Lord realm. Perhaps their initial position was that no matter what, they had to reach the level of a paramount god to be able to enter this place. Of course, no matter what the 2 Divine Halls thought, the current Yi Xian had no way of knowing. The only choice he could make was to continue moving forward. Only by continuously moving forward would Yi Xian have the chance to leave this place. The path to the heavens seemed to have no end. However, when Yi Xian walked to the next safe area, he was still shocked by the next test. It was an eye, an incomparably huge eye. The eye covered the entire space, as if it was overlooking the world. Just a glance at it made Yi Xian feel as if his soul had been suppressed. Strange eyes, powerful strength. Could it be that this was the 3rd stage's test? Moreover, this eye did not exist at all, but was formed from the power of the laws. The black pupil represented the power of the 3 great laws of the Darkness Divine Palace. The white eye was formed from the power of the 3 great laws of the Nature Divine Palace. As for the eye socket, it was the law of primal chaos. It was as if the law of primal chaos wanted to repair the eye formed from the power of the 6 great laws,
Or as if the eye formed from the power of the six great laws was trying to break free from the restraints of the law of primal chaos.
Of course, the strangest thing was that the eye seemed to be staring fixedly at Yi Xian. What exactly was the test of this stage? Yi Xian was puzzled. At this moment, he hadn't suffered any attacks, nor did he feel anything different. Yi Xian walked forward step by step without any abnormalities.
However, the eye in the sky made Yi Xian understand that he was undergoing an examination.
However, this examination wasn't something that Yi Xian understood. Being stared at by such a huge eye, even Yi Xian felt his hair stand on end. After all, this was the eye that occupied the entire sky. Yi Xian continued forward. Other than continuing forward, he couldn't do anything else. Suddenly, Yi Xian felt his body relax. Although in reality, there wasn't any power to suppress Yi Xian felt his body relax. It was the power of the two-dimensional laws. The power of the two-dimensional laws had disappeared. Sure enough, Yi Xian had already flown into the sky the moment he moved. However, the power of the two-dimensional laws had disappeared, and the huge eye in the sky was still there. Thus, Yi Xian didn't dare to fly too high. This was because every time Yi Xian flew an inch higher into the sky, he would feel the pressure increase by a bit. Xiaoran, that huge eye, was not just used to look. Just what was the test of this stage? At this moment, Yi Xian couldn't help but guess in his heart. However, after all, it was impossible for Yi Xian to know what had not happened. Suddenly, the eye in the sky shot out a ray of light that covered Yi Xian. No system notification sounded out, allowing Yi Xian to understand that this light wasn't harmful to Yi Xian. However, this didn't mean that Yi Xian wasn't puzzled. Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. He wanted to see what would happen next. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. Previous chapter, next chapter, boom. 6 loud sounds accompanied by 6 rays of light descended from the sky. They were also emitted from the eyes. 6 people. This time, it wasn't a puppet, but a real 6 figures. Chapter 2840. Origin Secret Realm. Yi Xian frowned. The current situation had already exceeded his imagination. Yi Xian had no idea what would happen next. Were these 6 people friends or foes? Suddenly, one of them opened his eyes. Following that, all 6 of them opened their eyes one after another. However, none of them made any movements. After opening their eyes, they just looked at Yi Xian. "You're the chosen one?" One of them asked Yi Xian. A powerful force exploded from his body, allowing Yi Xian to know that this person was definitely a super expert.
"Yes, I'm the chosen one."
Although Yi Xian didn't know who these people were, he didn't dare to hide it. Hearing Yi Xian's reply, the 6 of them simultaneously focused their gazes on Yi Xian and sized him up. Average aptitude. Weak. Ordinary bloodline. Magic treasures are useless.
Your mastery of the laws is not bad.
The 6 of them, one after another, actually belittled Yi Xian to the point that he was useless. Yi Xian couldn't interrupt at all because the 6 of them didn't pay any attention to him. Forget it. We don't have much time left. We don't have any other choice. Let's join hands and send him there. One of the 6 said indifferently. Where to? Where to? Yi Xian couldn't help but be puzzled.
However, it seemed that he didn't have the right to speak at all.
Isn't it too early to send him there?
With his strength, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for him to get out of there.
Then what do you think we can do? At this time, what other choice do we have?
Our 2 shrines only have one spot to go there, and in millions of years, only such a little fellow who is suitable to inherit the will of our 2 shrines has appeared.
Do we still have time to ascend for 1,000,000 years? That's right, we have no choice. However, we might as well let him go to the lowest level zone first. I remember that each of us has a teleportation chance in our hands, so why don't we give him all 6 chances? Where he can go will depend on his own luck. What do you guys think? And I think so. I'm afraid right now, this is the only choice. Yi Xian really wanted to ask what they were talking about and where they were going to send him. Unfortunately, even if Yi Xian asked, it would be useless. Suddenly, a dragon mark universe ring appeared on Yi Xian's finger without any warning. At the same time, Yi Xian's figure flew uncontrollably towards the eye in the sky. What exactly do you want to do to me? At this point, Yi Xian couldn't care less as he loudly spoke to the 6 people. Unfortunately, it was useless. The 6 of them were still muttering to themselves and completely ignored Yi Xian. Go there and train well. Remember, you only have 6 chances. It's your luck to be able to enter that place, and it's also the only chance for our 2 shrines to fall or become stronger. Yi Xian entered the eye along with this voice. Afterwards, a powerful law energy was activated, and in an instant, Yi Xian's figure disappeared. When Yi Xian woke up once more, he already knew where he was, the boundary realm. The realm was a special place. It said that it existed, but as long as one's strength did not reach a certain level and their luck was not good enough, not to mention entering, even knowing about it would be very difficult. The realm was also a place that did not exist because it did not exist in any corner of the God realm. This place could be considered a secret realm, but it was not a secret realm. Legend has it that the realm was the birthplace of the laws. Those who were able to enter this place were definitely the most powerful geniuses and the most powerful forces in the God realm. No one knew where the realm was located, but those who knew were all yearning for it. As the birthplace of the laws, there were countless fortuitous encounters and opportunities here. But at this moment, the place Yi Xian was pointing to was only the lowest and lowest level of existence in the realm. The world zone was like a tall pagoda. However, each level of the world zone was like a boundless continent. In fact, each level was even larger than the God world. This was because this realm had its own unique law, and that was infinite reproduction. Because of the existence of this law, no one would be able to reach the end of their path. Because with every step they took, the law of infinite reproduction would expand the continent by a bit. This was not something that could be created by human power, but was naturally born from the mysterious law. Of course, the realm might be called another way to let the people of the God realm know what kind of place it was. Origin Secret Realm. There were many other names for the realm. Origin Secret Realm, Ancestral Grounds, Primordial Chaos, Starting Point. There were many different names. Different races, different inheritances, and so the names were different. However, the Origin Secret Realm was the most widely used. To be more precise, this realm was actually the ultimate inheritance of the God realm. It had been like this since the Primordial Era, followed by the Middle Ages, the Ancient Era, and the Ancient Era. In every period of time, this special Origin Secret Realm would always exist. Perhaps the other secret realms would disappear, but the Origin Secret Realm would not disappear at all. Of course, the Origin Secret Realm was incomparably vast, reaching as high as 999 levels. It could be said that no one could walk out of it normally. There were only 3 ways to walk out of the Origin Secret Realm. The first was to encounter the random teleportation gate that only appeared once in countless years, and then be teleported to an unknown place. The second was the special method of leaving that the various great powers grasped. For example, the 6 chances that the 2 shrines had given Yi Xian to leave. The third method was to become the master of a level. Obtain the right to use the Origin Palace. There was an Origin Palace in every level. Within the palace, there was a teleportation gate that led out of the Origin Secret Realm. Thus, becoming the master of the Origin Palace would give one the opportunity to enter and exit the Origin Secret Realm. Of course, the so-called Origin Palace Master was meant to become the most powerful existence on this level. When Yi Xian opened his eyes, he saw a city, an incomparably powerful city. This was because in this city, it could be said that the streets were filled with God Emperor realm existences. As for a God King like Yi Xian, he could really be considered to be an exception. Why did you suppress your cultivation level so low? Suddenly, a person behind Yi Xian curiously asked Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned around, but was actually unable to see through his cultivation. System, detect this person's strength. Ding. System notification. Host's cultivation level is insufficient, unable to view. Unable to view. Didn't that mean that this person's strength far surpassed Yi Xian's by far too much? Heavens, what kind of place was this? Why was it that in the outside world powerful existences that could become divine lords were everywhere here? Chapter 2841. Demon God Divine Domain. Yi Xian didn't even know about such a terrifying place before. At this moment, Yi Xian felt powerless. He really wanted to say that it wasn't that he was suppressing his cultivation, but that his cultivation was really only at the God King realm. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't dare to say it. After all, the God King realm was simply an exception here. Oh, isn't it just a realm? What's there to care about? Yi Xian suppressed the shock in his heart and said indifferently to that person. Who knew that person would actually smile and say, "That's true. In our first level, basically everyone has just entered the Origin Secret Realm. How could there be so much to pay attention to? I reckon that everyone is about the same. It's already not bad if they can break through to the Paramount God Realm. By the way, brother, my name is Lu Zhang. Even the Chain Trap Secret Realm, you? You even reached that secret realm?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. He didn't dare to answer so easily. However, could it be that these people all came from a certain secret realm? Could it be that they weren't from the divine realm? Where is this Chain Trap Secret Realm? Why don't I know about it? Yi Xian changed the topic and asked a question in return. Even if you don't know, our Chain Trap Secret Realm is only a very weak one in the ancient Lost Race Secret Realm Alliance. This time, our entire secret realm only got 3 slots to enter the Origin Secret Realm. Sigh, ever since we lost contact with the Divine Realm, we can only come to the Origin Secret Realm if we want to break through. What do you mean? Yi Xian was a little stunned. Ancient Lost Race Secret Realm Alliance? What kind of organization was that? Also, what did he mean when he said that he had lost contact with the Divine Realm continent? Could it be that these people weren't from the Divine Realm continent at all? However, Yi Xian thought about it and understood that it would be strange if they were from the Divine Realm continent. One had to know that Mi Ming was only a god emperor, but he was a divine master of the Kunlun god domain. If these people were to be placed outside, they would be existences that surpassed Mi Ming or Mi Ming. They couldn't possibly say that they were all divine masters of a god domain, right? If that was the case, no matter how big the Divine Realm continent was, it wouldn't be enough to divide them up. A single Kunlun god domain was the size of 3 million realms, and a single realm was incomparably vast. No matter how big the Divine Realm continent was, it was impossible for it to have hundreds of thousands of divine masters. Moreover, this was only one of the 999 levels. Moreover, there might not be only one city on this level. At this moment, Yi Xian's heart was filled with shock and fear. He suddenly realized that he was nothing here. Moreover, he didn't even have the ability to defend himself. Although Yi Xian's methods were impressive, Yi Xian discovered that his strength wasn't even worth mentioning in the origin grounds. Is he really just a god king? That's impossible. If you want to enter the origin realm, you have to be at least at the god emperor realm. How did a mere first-grade god king like him get in? Something strange. Right, there must be something strange about this guy. There must be something special about him. Could it be that he came from the legendary Divine Realm continent? A few passers-by glanced at Yi Xian when they saw him, but some of them saw through his true strength with a single glance. In an instant, Yi Xian became the focus of everyone's attention. After all, it was extremely strange for a mere first-grade god king to appear in the origin realm. And that sentence, that Yi Xian came from the legendary Divine Realm continent, attracted everyone's attention. Yi Xian was helpless. He really wanted to say that this place as well as these people should be described as legends. He didn't expect that he would become an existence of legends. However, facing so many powerful existences, just the aura they emitted was already unbearable for Yi Xian. This wasn't the aura of 1 or 2 experts, but the pressure condensed from the aura of countless experts. However, it was a good thing that although these people were discussing amongst themselves, no one really made a move against Yi Xian. Otherwise, Yi Xian probably wouldn't be able to resist at all. Yi Xian knew that he couldn't stay here any longer. Since he had 6 chances to enter and exit this place at will, then leaving now and raising his strength outside before coming in might be the wisest choice. The mysterious origin realm wasn't something that Yi Xian's current strength was qualified to stay inside. Yi Xian carefully left the crowd, found a deserted place, and activated the teleportation. These 6 teleportations didn't use teleportation talismans or anything else, but were directly bound to Yi Xian. Thus, Yi Xian only needed a thought to activate the teleportation and leave. Perhaps in the eyes of others, advancing from the God King realm to the God Emperor realm would indeed require a lot of time, and it would even be difficult for them to achieve it in their entire lives. However, Yi Xian was different. Therefore, Yi Xian dared to go out. Of course he had to go out. Only after his strength rose to the God Emperor realm would Yi Xian be qualified to enter this place. However, Yi Xian only thought about how powerful the origin realm was, so he wanted to leave. However, he forgot that those 6 experts wouldn't know where Yi Xian came from. It was impossible for them to teleport Yi Xian to the second secret realm. Thus, after Yi Xian was teleported away, he was stunned to discover that he'd once again arrived at an unfamiliar place. Not to mention anything else, Yi Xian knew that this wasn't the Kunlun divine domain. At this moment, Yi Xian was in a wasteland. Yi Xian could tell that this wasteland might have been a bustling place countless years ago, but now there were only weeds, withered trees, and dilapidated walls. Yi Xian looked at the scene in front of him. Although he really wanted to know where this place was, it seemed that the most important thing right now was to be able to leave this place. After all, this was an unknown place, so Yi Xian still maintained a certain level of vigilance. After randomly choosing a direction, Yi Xian directly flew forward. One mountain after another flew past Yi Xian's feet. However, Yi Xian discovered that there were still countless mountains beneath his feet. Finally, Yi Xian saw a building.
Without the slightest hesitation, he directly landed.
This was because Yi Xian wanted to find someone else to ask where this place was and how to return to the Kunlun divine domain. However, when Yi Xian landed on the ground, he was shocked to discover that this place was actually a gathering place for divine beasts.
Who are you?
At the same time that Yi Xian landed, a strange divine beast arrived in front of him. Since it could speak the human language, it was obvious that this divine beast was not weak. Chapter 2842. Exterminating All. Who are you guys? Yi Xian coldly asked.
He didn't feel the slightest bit of fear because of the other party's numbers.
How dare you?
Arrogant brat, how dare you be rude to me?
Another divine beast appeared in front of Yi Xian. The divine beast transformed into a human and pointed at Yi Xian's nose as it cursed. First, he was looked down upon by a puppet, then he was suspected by the experts in the origin realm. Now, even a mere divine beast dared to point at Yi Xian's nose and speak like this. Wei Zhentian, kill this divine beast for me. Yi Xian frowned slightly as he gave the order. In an instant, Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and charged towards the divine beast. Puchi!
A sword pierced through. Without any suspense, the sword pierced through.
This was because although this divine beast could take human form, its strength wasn't very strong. Damned fellow, you actually dared to kill. No, he's a human, he's a spy from the Kunlun divine domain. A divine beast saw through Yi Xian's identity and roared loudly. The moment this human spoke, the surrounding divine beasts immediately pounced over, causing Yi Xian to be slightly stunned. He actually said that he was a spy from the Kunlun divine domain. Then, it was obvious that this was not the Kunlun divine domain. Furthermore, it was a divine domain that was at odds with the Kunlun divine domain. And right now, wasn't the enemy of the Kunlun divine domain the demon god's divine domain? Could it be that he had actually been teleported to the demon god's divine domain? For a moment, Yi Xian was incomparably puzzled. However, when he thought about the uniqueness of the 2 divine halls in the second secret realm, it seemed that teleporting him to the demon god's divine domain wasn't something impossible. Damn it, capture the spy! A divine beast roared. In an instant, all the divine beasts on the mountain pounced towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian wouldn't be polite either. After all, none of the divine beasts here could threaten Yi Xian. Wei Zhentian, magic treasure form. Kill for me. Divine wood sword attendant, it's time for you to make your move. Kill them all. This was the demon god's divine domain. If Yi Xian didn't kill these fellows from the demon god's divine domain, then they would definitely spread the news. At that time, Yi Xian would probably face the pursuit of the entire demon god's divine domain. The demon god's divine domain was an existence that could contend against the Kunlun divine domain. Then, once he was chased by the entire demon god's divine domain, the consequences could be imagined. If that was really the case, Yi Xian definitely wouldn't be able to escape. The 2 god-slaughtering swords quickly rushed out. In an instant, a bloody storm rained down, and the divine wood sword attendant also showed no mercy. The divine wood sword attendant's defense was incomparably strong, and its attack power was not weak either. The divine wood sword attendant waved its hands continuously, and every time it waved, a divine beast would definitely turn into a bloody mist. Regardless of whether it was in human form or in its original form, no divine beast could withstand a single attack from the divine wood sword attendant. Yi Xian stood on the spot as he looked at the purgatory around him.
However, He didn't feel the slightest bit of pity in his heart. After all, these were all divine beasts, and they were divine beasts from the demon god's divine realm. If Yi Xian didn't kill them, then they would kill Yi Xian. Moreover, Yi Xian had also heard that in the demon god's divine realm, humans could be said to be like slaves. They couldn't even be considered slaves. Humans were delicious snacks for these divine beasts. Therefore, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't show any mercy to these divine beasts. In just a short moment, all of the divine beasts on this mountain had been killed by Yi Xian. However, the only thing that made Yi Xian depressed was that the news had still leaked. Yi Xian's movements couldn't be said to be slow, but the number of divine beasts gathered here had reached over 10,000. Thus, Yi Xian didn't have the time to kill them all. In the end, there were still some divine beasts that spread the news. Once this news spread, Yi Xian knew very well what he would face next. A war between a single person and a divine domain. If Yi Xian wanted to live, then he could only walk out of the demon god's divine domain. However, Yi Xian wasn't prepared to leave just like that because Luo Luo was also in the demon god's divine domain. Yi Xian wouldn't give up on searching for her. Since he'd already arrived at the demon god's divine domain, Yi Xian wouldn't mind causing a ruckus. Devour. With a casual wave of Yi Xian's hand, the corpses of the tens of thousands of divine beasts were directly devoured by Yi Xian. Although the strength of these divine beasts was average and couldn't allow Yi Xian to level up, using the method of devouring to deal with the traces of battle was a very good method. Come out, I know you're hiding there. After doing all of this, Yi Xian casually spoke to a large tree. This was because Yi Xian had long since sensed that there was a person hiding within the tree. To be more precise, it was a divine beast. No, don't kill me. I didn't see anything. I promise, I definitely won't say anything. Please don't kill me. Sure enough, after Yi Xian saw through that person's disguise, a half-man, half-beast with a pig's head walked out. As soon as he came out, he directly knelt in front of Yi Xian. You want to live? Yi Xian indifferently asked the half-man, half-pig divine beast. I want to live, please don't kill me. The divine beast frantically knelt in front of Yi Xian and continuously kowtowed. All right, if you want to live, then answer my questions honestly. However, if you hesitate or hide anything, then you can die. Yi Xian looked at the divine beast. When the divine beast nodded, Yi Xian continued to ask, where is this place? Replying to my lord, this is the territory of the Heavenly Dragon King. Heavenly Dragon King? Who is the Heavenly Dragon King? Tell me the details. Yes. Replying to my lord, this Heavenly Dragon King is one of the 8 great divine generals under the Divine Lord. He is a lord under the Dark Demon Dragon Divine General. Including our realm, as well as the surrounding 100 realms, they are all his territory. Lord? Yi Xian was slightly astonished. However, thinking that this was the demon god's divine domain and not the Kunlun divine domain, he didn't think too much about it. After all, every divine domain had its own system and rules. As for this demon god's divine domain, it was a system of enfeoffment. A mere lord of 100 realms territory, this fellow was probably just a small character. After that, Yi Xian asked a few more questions. Unfortunately, this divine beast didn't know much, so it wasn't of any help to Yi Xian at all. Thus, Yi Xian killed him with a single sword strike without hesitation. Heavenly Dragon King? Perhaps, this Heavenly Dragon King knew more things. Yi Xian didn't hesitate and directly walked towards the cave where the Heavenly Dragon King was. Some of the experts of the demon god's divine domain liked to imitate the Kunlun divine domain and build huge cities to live in. However, there were also some who liked to follow their original habits and live in caves, mountains, and even the wilderness. This Heavenly Dragon King lived in a cave. The location was also very easy to find. It was a huge mountain peak. Chapter 2843. Lord Heavenly Dragon King. After all, it was the place where the Heavenly Dragon King lived, so there were quite a few divine beasts here. However, Yi Xian wouldn't care that much. The strength of these divine beasts were generally very average. Even the Heavenly Dragon King was only the same as Yi Xian, a high-level divine king. Therefore, Yi Xian wasn't afraid of any of the divine beasts here. Who are you? How dare you trespass on the mountain? Do you know that this is Lord Heavenly Dragon King's cave? When a transformed divine beast saw Yi Xian coming over, It directly stood in front of him. With a casual glance, Yi Xian could already tell that this fellow was only a mere third-grade divine lord. Of course, an inferior divine lord would probably be considered an expert under the Heavenly Dragon King. Unfortunately, the one he met was Yi Xian. Thus, he was destined to die. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to waste his breath. The god-slaughtering sword flew out and killed the divine beast with a single strike. When Yi Xian killed the divine beast, a moment later, the mountain was filled with the sounds of people, and a large group of divine beasts had already come out. After a while, the Heavenly Dragon King directly rushed out.
"Who dares to cause trouble in my territory?
Are you courting death?" The moment the Heavenly Dragon King came out, he roared loudly. The deafening sound reverberated throughout the valley. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't care about him at all. System, detect the strength of this divine beast. Ding. System notification. Target, Superior Grade 4 God King Realm. Superior Grade 4 God King? Perhaps in this area, he could be called the Overlord. However, if he met Yi Xian, then he could only blame his bad luck. Yi Xian looked at the Heavenly Dragon King and indifferently said, "I'll give you two choices. First, listen to me obediently. Then, I can consider sparing your life. Second, if you don't accept it, then I will take your head." The Heavenly Dragon King looked at Yi Xian as his eyes flickered. No matter what, he was the lord of this area. Now that someone dared to speak to him in such a manner, especially after the Heavenly Dragon King saw through Yi Xian's identity and knew his strength, he laughed out loud. "Human, it's actually a human. Furthermore, it's a human at the Superior Grade 1 God King realm. Could it be that you're that divine lord from the human clan's resistance army? Haha, I'm dying of laughter. A bunch of ants actually want to try and resist. Furthermore, they even arrogantly call themselves divine lords. Human brat, could it be that you're here to be my snack?" Disdain. This was the disdain of the thorns. Even though the Heavenly Dragon King had already seen through Yi Xian's cultivation, he didn't care at all. In the Heavenly Dragon King's eyes, there was only boundless disdain. Indeed, the human clan of the demon god's domain was just a snack for these powerful divine beasts. Now, even if Yi Xian had the cultivation of a superior grade 1 god king, the Heavenly Dragon King had the cultivation of a superior grade 4 god king. He indeed had the qualifications to be arrogant. Of course, the prerequisite was that he didn't meet Yi Xian. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. He was too lazy to talk nonsense and directly attacked the Heavenly Dragon King. Because to deal with this fellow, only by letting him know his own strength would he understand what it meant to be obedient. "Audacious human clan ant, you're courting death." The one who shouted this was not the Heavenly Dragon King, but an expert beside the Heavenly Dragon King. This fellow also had the cultivation of a medium grade 6 god king. However, in the demon god's domain, the human clan had always been bullied. It was impossible for them to obtain any cultivation resources. Naturally, there was no need to even think about cultivation techniques or divine abilities. It could be said that other than a few humans who had great opportunities, the rest of the people did not have any decent divine abilities. Treasures and the like were even more out of the question. This fellow had enough confidence to kill Yi Xian. In his eyes, Yi Xian was just a snack, a food, a human that wasn't even worth mentioning. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was Yi Xian. He wasn't one of the humans that had been bullied for countless years in the demon god's domain. "Die!" Yi Xian casually pointed. In an instant, a mysterious power was activated. Yi Xian used the 6 syllables incantation. The divine beast that was incomparably arrogant a moment ago died on the spot in the next moment. What? What's going on? In an instant, all the demon gods were astonished. After all, they had never encountered such a situation before. They didn't even consider that it was Yi Xian who killed the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast. In the eyes of these divine beasts, they all felt that the human race was the lowliest race. They were just their food. Could food kill its master? They wouldn't have such a thought. Therefore, these divine beasts didn't know what was going on with the sudden death of the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast. But then they finally found out the reason. Unfortunately, by the time they found out, it was already too late. 6 syllables incantation. Destroy. Yi Xian casually waved his hand, and a mysterious and profound power was activated once again.
This time, Yi Xian used the extermination symbol art. Extermination symbol art. Extermination race. This time, Yi Xian used the extermination symbol art against these divine beasts. In an instant, countless divine beasts fell to the ground. Without any warning, he fell to the ground. He didn't even know how he died. This time, over 1,000 divine beasts fell to the ground. They couldn't be any more dead.
You, who exactly are you?
This time, even a fool could tell that there was something strange about Yi Xian. At the same time, they understood that the death of the medium-grade divine king realm divine beast was caused by Yi Xian. Although they didn't know how Yi Xian did it, it didn't stop them from determining that it was Yi Xian's doing.
Damn it, human brat, you're courting death. Kill him.
Seeing that Yi Xian didn't return, the Heavenly Dragon King gave the order and countless divine beasts pounced towards Yi Xian. Even if these divine beasts were weaker than Yi Xian, they weren't afraid at all. In their eyes, Yi Xian was just food. Would Yi Xian show mercy?
Impossible.
This was the demon god's divine domain. It could be said that Yi Xian was facing a divine domain by himself. If he showed mercy, then he probably wouldn't even know how he died. Moreover, these divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain didn't even see humans as living beings. They only saw them as food and killed them at will. Then, why would Yi Xian care about them? Yi Xian only needed to treat them as resources that he could devour. Mighty heaven-shaking, magic treasure form, leave none alive. At the same time that the divine beasts charged over, Yi Xian gave the order to attack. In an instant, Wei Zhentian transformed into a god-slaughtering sword and immediately controlled the two god-slaughtering swords to charge out. Of course, Yi Xian himself moved. Eternal Night Domain. Chapter 2844. Capturing the Dragon King. Absolute Zero. The moment Yi Xian made his move, he didn't hold back at all. Absolute Zero smashed towards the slightly stronger divine beasts. Once they were frozen, what awaited them would be the merciless slaughter of the heavens. 1, 2, 3. One by one, the divine beasts of the demon god's domain finally experienced what terror and despair were. In front of Yi Xian, they didn't even have the slightest bit of defense. They could only wait to be killed. At this moment, some of the divine beasts couldn't help but recall how they had surrounded and killed those humans. Wasn't it the same? It was just like now. However, at that time, they had watched the weak humans struggle and then enjoy the feast. And today, they were the ones being hunted down and killed at will. At the very least, they didn't have to endure the cruel words around them. However, the more silent they were, the more terrifying they were. Other than the despairing cries of the divine beasts before they were killed, there were no other sounds. On the mountain top of the space, only miserable screams echoed. Stop, stop right now. The Heavenly Dragon King couldn't help but shout loudly as he watched his people being continuously killed by Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't have the slightest intention of paying attention to him. The Heavenly Dragon King was enraged and attacked Yi Xian. Unfortunately, it was useless. He didn't even need Yi Xian to make a move. Just the divine wood sword attendant alone was enough to put the Heavenly Dragon King in danger. If it wasn't for Yi Xian's order not to kill him, the Heavenly Dragon King would have died countless times. Don't kill me. Help. I don't want to die.
I beg of you to spare me. I won't dare to do it again.
Countless voices reverberated in the mountains. However, they wouldn't be exchanged for Yi Xian's benevolence, no matter what evil deeds they'd committed. For his own sake, Yi Xian wouldn't let the divine beasts here leave alive. At this moment, Wei Zhentian was controlling the two god-slaughtering swords to fly around the surroundings. Any divine beast that tried to escape would be mercilessly killed by Wei Zhentian. Inside, Yi Xian released his god-tier mount, the flower god sword attendant, and continued to kill. Because of the eternal night domain, these divine beasts, who could no longer see anything, could only wait to be slaughtered. The roar became softer and softer until it completely disappeared. The disappearance of the voice meant that all the divine beasts here had been slaughtered. Of course, there was an exception, and that was the Heavenly Dragon King, who was having a hard time fighting against the divine wood sword attendant. At this moment, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't have any fighting spirit left. It could be said that he only wanted to escape from this terrifying human race. However, he couldn't do it at all. In front of Yi Xian, he didn't even have the slightest chance of escaping.
Finally, Yi Xian arrived beside the Heavenly Dragon King. At this moment, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't have half of his previous arrogant appearance. When he saw Yi Xian walk over, he hurriedly knelt in front of him. "My lord, spare me. My lord, spare me." He clearly had the cultivation of a high-level 4th-grade god king, but at this moment, the Sky King only dared to kneel on the ground and kowtow as he begged for mercy. The impression that Yi Xian gave the Heavenly Dragon King was too deep, so deep that he would never forget it. That invincible attitude of casually slaughtering millions of divine beasts made this Heavenly Dragon King not have the slightest bit of resistance. "I'll give you another chance. Choose, are you obedient, or let me kill you? In any case, if I kill you, the other divine beasts will definitely cherish this chance to live." "No, no, my lord, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. As long as you let me go, I'll do anything you want me to," the Heavenly Dragon King said loudly. At this moment, he only wanted to live. How could he care so much? Yi Xian nodded his head. In an instant, the divine wood sword attendant returned to Yi Xian's side from the Heavenly Dragon King's side. However, the Heavenly Dragon King didn't dare to have any improper thoughts. He only wanted to escape? He didn't even dare to think about it. This was because the Heavenly Dragon King knew very well that Yi Xian's strength wasn't something he could compare to. Don't think that just because Yi Xian's realm was lower than his, Yi Xian was weaker than him. In reality, just a single divine wood sword attendant was enough to make him unable to resist at all. "Alright, if you want to live, then listen to me obediently." Yi Xian didn't care about this fellow. If it wasn't for the fact that he still had some use for this Heavenly Dragon King, Yi Xian wouldn't mind killing him. "Devour." With a wave of his hand, the divine beast corpses that covered the mountains and plains instantly disappeared. Ding. System notification. Host has broken through. Current realm. 2nd-grade high-level god king realm. Yi Xian didn't have the slightest expression. After all, Yi Xian knew that if he didn't reach the god emperor realm, he wouldn't even have the qualifications to enter the origin secret realm. Yi Xian naturally wouldn't waste killing these divine beasts. The current Yi Xian would seize any opportunity to increase his strength. Yi Xian directly walked out with the Heavenly Dragon King. In Yi Xian's eyes, this demon god's domain could be considered a pretty good place. If Yi Xian could kill so many divine beasts, it would undoubtedly provide Yi Xian with quite a bit of cultivation. Quickly raising his cultivation and searching for Luo Luo's whereabouts was the most important thing for Yi Xian right now. As for anything else, Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to think about it. Not long after Yi Xian left with the Heavenly Dragon King, a group of divine beasts arrived. However, when they saw the bloodstains on the mountain, they didn't see any corpses or any survivors. These people retreated in fear. Within a small area of the demon god's domain, a piece of news spread. A powerful spy from the Kunlun divine domain had snuck into the demon god's domain. Moreover, he had killed every beast he saw, leaving no survivors. Even an overlord's territory had been completely wiped out. Of course, there was also another version. It said that the human race, which had always been regarded as a snack by the divine beasts, had actually produced an expert who went around killing divine beasts. But no matter which news it was, it seemed that it was enough to shock and panic the people of the demon god's domain. No one was willing to face Yi Xian, the god of slaughter. However, no one knew where Yi Xian was. There were even quite a few indignant divine beasts that formed teams to kill Yi Xian. Of course, there were also lords who issued orders to capture Yi Xian. However, the next few days were abnormally average, causing people to be unable to understand what Yi Xian was going to do. Actually, what Yi Xian wanted to do now was very simple. It was to head to a genius training camp in the demon god's domain. Just like the Kunlun divine domain, the demon god's domain naturally had an existence similar to an academy. However, in the demon god's domain, it was called a cave. This wasn't the cave that the human race was talking about, but a real cave. Yi Xian was going to a place called the Water Moon Cave. Many geniuses of the demon god's domain were gathered here. Originally, Yi Xian hoped that the Heavenly Dragon King would be able to provide him with information about Luolua's whereabouts or a way to leave the demon god's domain. Unfortunately, the Heavenly Dragon King was only a small character in the demon god's domain. Therefore, he couldn't count on the Heavenly Dragon King at all. It was useless to Yi Xian. Chapter 2845. 2433. Eating humans, the Water Moon Cave was, after all, the place where the geniuses of the demon god's divine realm gathered. Hence, all the people here were divine beasts in human form. When Yi Xian first arrived here, he even suspected that he'd arrived at the territory of the human race. After all, the entire city was filled with all kinds of divine beasts in human form. However, Yi Xian was very clear that this wasn't the territory of the human race. After all, the customs and habits here were completely different. At this moment, Yi Xian walked into a restaurant. Just like the Kunlun divine realm, although many divine beasts didn't need to eat and wouldn't be affected in any way, they were still used to eating something delicious. Yi Xian was prepared to taste the special dishes of the demon god's divine realm. "Waiter, what special dishes do you have in your restaurant?" Yi Xian asked the waiter. The waiter's strength was not bad. He already had the cultivation of a low-level divine king. At this moment, the waiter looked at Yi Xian happily. After all, anyone who entered the restaurant and asked about the special dishes was undoubtedly an expert, a rich man. "Aya, this customer, you really are in luck. Today, I have a few new desserts. I'm sure you'll be satisfied." "Oh, tell me about it. What's delicious?" Yi Xian was also interested as he asked the waiter. "All right, please take a look. This is a human dessert caught from the distant snowy region. The taste is very delicious. Our shop's chef specially chose 10,000-year-old snow lotus velvet, 1,000-year-old ice heart soul spirit, 9,000-year-old divine water returning spirit grass, and has already added, and other divine herbs. Put the fresh twin human babies into the altar, refine them for 49 days, remove all impurities, and then refine them for 99 days with a live fire for 81 days. In this way, not only will the taste be incomparably delicious, but even when you eat it, the two babies will still be alive." "All right, sir, please watch." With a wave of his hand, another image of a blade appeared in front of Yi Xian. This time, it wasn't a baby, but a peerlessly beautiful young girl. "Customer, look, this is a special ingredient made from human race's top-grade beauties. The main dish of the fairy banquet, the exquisite fairy. Look at how smooth the skin of a human girl is, how tender the meat is, whether it's eaten raw or cooked, it's still delicious." Yi Xian frowned. There were actually two dishes that used humans as the main ingredients. Yi Xian clenched his fists, and the anger in his heart was unbearable. However, Yi Xian was well aware that this was the demon god's domain after all. Thus, even if Yi Xian was angry in his heart, he could only be angry and not say anything. "Since I've met you, then it can be considered fate. I only have this much power. If I can save one, then it's one." Yi Xian silently thought in his heart. After all, he had a purpose for coming to the Water Moon Cave, so it wasn't good for him to cause a ruckus. This human beauty is not bad. And those two babies, don't put them in the dish yet. Bring them to me. Yi Xian said to the waiter in an attempt to save the three of them. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the waiter revealed a slightly surprised expression at first, but he didn't think too much about it. However, he awkwardly said, This request of the customer doesn't make sense. These are just two main dishes. Why would the customer have such a request?" In the eyes of the waiter, Yi Xian's request was indeed incomparably strange. After all, who would have nothing better to do than look at the appearance of the dishes before eating? The waiter thought for a moment before coming to a realization. Could it be that the customer is afraid that the dishes aren't fresh enough? Rest assured, the dishes in our shop are all freshly caught, so they are guaranteed to be incomparably fresh. Is that so? Could it be that those two babies were also caught by you? Yi Xian's face revealed a displeased expression. This wasn't a pretense. In fact, Yi Xian was already extremely furious in his heart. Aren't you making things difficult for me? These two babies are indeed newly born children of a human that my shop caught. However, this can definitely guarantee their freshness. Enough, if I say I want to see him, then I want to see him. With a bang, Yi Xian directly slapped the table. A table refined from high-grade black iron divine wood was directly smashed into pieces by Yi Xian. When the waiter saw Yi Xian getting angry, he didn't dare to delay any longer. He immediately said, "Sir, please don't be angry. This lowly one will immediately inform the kitchen." The waiter didn't dare to hesitate. After all, the people who came here to eat were either rich or noble. This was a subsidiary city of the Water Moon Cave. No matter what the cultivation level of the young people here was, young Master Shang had an incomparably deep background. He wasn't an existence that a restaurant like this could easily offend. At this moment, seeing Yi Xian get angry, how could he dare to delay? Very quickly, the waiter brought two people in. Each of them was dragging a cage in their hands. In one cage was the young girl, and in the other cage were the two babies. Ding! System notification, detected a special bloodline, goddess bloodline. He didn't expect that the system would give him a notification as soon as the girl arrived. This girl actually had a special bloodline. However, in the demon god's divine domain, no matter what bloodline it would be useless. After all, the human race was only the lowest level of food in the demon god's divine domain. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth slightly raised as he directly asked the waiter, "What's the price of these two dishes?" Seeing Yi Xian ask about the price, the waiter immediately revealed a smile and said, "Dear customer, these two dishes only cost a total of 50,000 spirit stones, which is a very cheap price. If you like it, my shop can even give you a 20% discount. Only 40,000 spirit stones will do." 40,000 spirit stones? A special bloodline, 3 lives, was only worth 40,000 spirit stones. Yi Xian frowned, but there was nothing he could do. With a wave of his hand, a pile of spirit stones appeared in front of the waiter. "All right, count carefully. There are a total of 50,000 spirit stones here. I don't want any discount from you. I want these two dishes. Open the cage, I want to take them away now. Dear customer, although eating it raw is a good choice, after all, the human race is not clean. I'm afraid eating it raw will cause unnecessary problems. Dear customer, why don't you leave it to my shop to deal with it? All right, I don't need you to care what I want to do." Scram! Yi Xian roared as he violently broke open the two cages. Since Yi Xian had already paid, no one would say anything when he broke open the cage. "Follow me," Yi Xian said to the young girl. At the same time, he'd already absorbed the two babies into the devouring space. The young girl hesitated for a moment, but could only follow Yi Xian and leave. After all, he didn't choose to go all out. Even though he knew very well that he had already been treated as food, he could only helplessly accept his fate. This was the helplessness of the human race in the demon god realm. Sometimes, even if they knew what the outcome would be, they were powerless to resist. Chapter 2846. Main course. Very quickly, Yi Xian brought the young girl away from the Water Moon Cave subsidiary city. Actually, Yi Xian knew very well that it wasn't a good idea to have the young girl follow by his side or leave by herself. Of course, Yi Xian could choose to absorb him into the devouring space. However, since he'd come to the demon god's domain, Yi Xian naturally hoped to be able to save more humans. Thus, it might be a good choice for this young girl to stay outside and lead the way for Yi Xian. Those two babies were different. After all, the two babies could be effectively taken care of in the devouring space, so it was useless to leave them outside. However, this young girl was Yi Xian's only guide. Yi Xian released his spiritual will and carefully examined his surroundings. After confirming that there was no danger, he said to the young girl, "All right, we're safe now." However, the young girl still looked at Yi Xian in panic. It was obvious that she thought that Yi Xian was going to eat her or harm him right now. Xianxia was very clear in her heart that once a human girl fell into the hands of a divine beast from the demon god's domain, it could be said that her life was worse than death. In fact, she would even receive treatment that was even more terrifying than becoming a dish. Back then, because Xianxia was naughty, she walked out of the village, but she didn't expect to be captured the moment she came out. Along the way, he had seen many encounters with the human clan. Originally, there were more than 3,000 people imprisoned together with her. But now, he was the only one left. As for the two babies, Xianxia had watched them being born. In reality, the two babies could be considered half human and half beast. Unfortunately, in the demon god's domain, half human and half beast had never been truly recognized. There were even people from the demon god's domain who specially raised a group of human women. Usually, they would be used as tools for the people of the demon god's domain to play with. The babies that they gave birth to would also be immediately sent to the restaurant. Along the way, Xianxia was lucky, but also unlucky. She was lucky because she was small and thin, so no one from the demon god's domain paid attention to her. Unlucky because he had seen too many tragic encounters. What do you want to do to me? Ouyang Shui looked at Yi Xian and asked in fear. Just by looking at Ouyang Shui's expression, Yi Xian already knew that Ouyang Shui had misunderstood. Therefore, Yi Xian lowered his cultivation level as much as possible. At the same time, he revealed a smile and said to Ouyang Shui, "You don't have to be afraid. My name is Yi Xian, and I'm also from the human clan. I came from the Kunlun Divine Domain." Kunlun Divine Domain? Ouyang Shui looked at Yi Xian in confusion. Yes, it's the Kunlun Divine Domain. In the previous Divine Domain War, our human clan's Kunlun Divine Domain won the war. However, I snuck in because of a special mission, so you don't have to be afraid. I'm the same as you, a human. Yi Xian said indifferently. However, who knew that after he finished speaking, Ouyang Shui directly threw herself into Yi Xian's embrace. Tears continuously flowed from her eyes as she sobbed in a low voice. "You're a human, you're really a human." "Yes, I'm a human." Yi Xian gently caressed Ouyang Shui's jade back, but he sighed inwardly. He knew why Ouyang Shui was so afraid, because in reality, Ouyang Shui had always been afraid. Among the humans in the demon god's divine domain, which one of them wasn't worried about their own tomorrow? "I know about the Kunlun Divine Domain. Grandma said that it is the holy land of our human clan. Over there, the human clan is the ruler. Yes, the Kunlun Divine Domain is the territory of the human clan. Don't worry, I will definitely bring you away." Yi Xian felt rather helpless in his heart. He'd only heard of the demon god's divine domain before, but he didn't know what it was like. Only now did Yi Xian know that the demon god's divine domain was simply the human clan's purgatory. No wonder the Kunlun Divine Domain and the demon god's divine domain had always been mortal enemies. It was because there was no room for reconciliation. However, it was a pity that the demon god's divine domain was also incomparably powerful. Therefore, even if Mi Ming wanted to save the human clan in the demon god's divine domain, he was unable to do so. After comforting Ouyang Shui for a period of time, she finally calmed down. At the same time, Yi Xian also found out some information about the human clan in the demon god's divine domain from Ouyang Shui. Because the human clan in the demon god's divine domain was suppressed by the divine beasts, they couldn't obtain any cultivation resources at all. Even the space for them to move around was very narrow. Moreover, the divine beasts in the demon god's divine domain would often come out to hunt these human clan. In the demon god's divine domain, there was almost no place for the human clan to hide. Take the village that Ouyang Shui came from, for example. In fact, there had always been a constant migration. In order to avoid the hunting of the divine beasts, Ouyang Shui's village constantly walked through dangerous places, snowy mountains, deserts, abysses. Any place that was hard to be discovered by others was the holy land in their hearts. If they wanted to live, they could only continue to escape. And it wasn't that the human clan didn't have any experts. Unfortunately, without cultivation resources, no matter how talented they were, it was impossible for them to have high achievements. Even if Ouyang Shui was a genius in their village, it was rare for her to cultivate to this nondescript low-class divine lord realm at such a young age with just a fortuitous encounter and without cultivation resources. The reason why Ouyang Shui's divine lord realm was nondescript was because Ouyang Shui's body had been trained to the body refinement realm, but she had almost no combat power. She couldn't even fly. In the demon god's divine domain, the human clan vigorously developed a sub-occupation called construction. This sub-occupation was different from artifact forging. It involved simple processing of materials that could be seen into things that could be used by humans. But no matter what, it was an indisputable fact that the human clan of the demon god's divine domain lived in fear at all times. If the conditions were right, Yi Xian naturally wouldn't mind helping others. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't have that ability right now. With her mere cultivation of a high-level god king, he didn't have the qualifications to cause a ruckus in the demon god's divine domain. If he wasn't careful, he might even be discovered by the demon god's divine domain and be hunted down. Fortunately, the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain usually like to take human form, and the humans of the demon god's divine domain were extremely weak, so they didn't dare to enter the divine beast cities and caves. Therefore, no one suspected Yi Xian. After all, it was impossible for the humans of the demon god's divine domain to reach the cultivation of a high-level god king. Therefore, when they saw Yi Xian's cultivation, the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain would naturally think that Yi Xian was a divine beast in human form and wouldn't think that Yi Xian was a human. Yi Xian secretly decided that he would save as many humans as he could in the demon god's divine domain. As for the demon god's divine domain, once Yi Xian's strength was sufficient, he would definitely erase this place. Chapter 28:47. Consecutive breakthroughs at the same time, he took out some magic treasures and cultivation resources and gave them to Ouyang Shui. This was the only thing Yi Xian could do. No matter how much more, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to do anything. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Yi Xian's mind. He thought of a skill that he'd almost never used before. Eternal Reward. The Eternal Reward was a skill that came with the eternal body. This skill was originally just a useless existence, but now, Yi Xian discovered that it was time for this skill to show its use. System. Can I use the faith point to exchange for eternal points? Ding. System prompt. Host can use faith point to exchange for eternal points. Alright, since I can use faith point to exchange for eternal points. System. Use faith point to exchange for an eternal point. I want to use the Eternal Reward skill. Ding. System prompt. Host has consumed 1 million faith point to exchange for 1 eternal point. Following the system prompt, Yi Xian obtained an eternal point. 1 million faith points to exchange for 1 eternal point didn't seem like a good deal, but Yi Xian couldn't care less. After all, eternal points were very difficult to obtain, but faith points were increasing at any time. Yi Xian naturally wouldn't fuss over it. Yi Xian couldn't even be bothered to see how many faith points he had. Use the skill, Eternal Reward. Use the ancient resources of the ancient zither space as the reward. Yi Xian said directly. Following Yi Xian's words, a powerful light enveloped Yi Xian. The light contained an extremely powerful energy. After all, this was the energy that was exchanged for using ancient resources. The energy continuously condensed and cleansed Ouyang Shui's body. Waves of incomparably pure divine power were directly infused into Ouyang Shui's body. Even the magic treasures that Yi Xian had given Yi Xian had changed. The light condensed and did not dissipate for a long time. Ouyang Shui's eyes were tightly shut, clearly undergoing the test. Yi Xian didn't know what Ouyang Shui had experienced, but the power of the ball of light was clearly able to transform her. Time flowed by. After a full 72 hours, Ouyang Shui finally walked out of the ball of light. In an instant, a powerful fluctuation exploded out from Ouyang Shui's body. This is bad. Yi Xian was shocked. He immediately picked up Ouyang Shui and quickly fled. Yi Xian didn't put Ouyang Shui down until he was 10,000 miles away. At this moment, Ouyang Shui still hadn't completely woken up. However, the system's notification had already sounded out. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, the designated target, the special bloodline has been successfully activated. Due to the host's eternal reward, Ouyang Shui's bloodline has been upgraded to the Heavenly Warring Divine Mother bloodline. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, Ouyang Shui's realm has increased. Current realm, peak 9th grade Divine Emperor realm. Divine Emperor? And it was even a peak 9th grade Divine Emperor realm? Yi Xian was slightly shocked. He didn't expect Ouyang Shui to advance so many levels in one go because of his eternal reward. One had to know that Yi Xian himself was only a 1st grade God King, but he didn't expect that an eternal reward would actually create a peak 9th grade Divine Emperor. This was an entire realm. Moreover, he was only one step away from breaking through. It was impossible for Yi Xian not to be surprised. However, it was also because of this that Yi Xian felt that it was time for him to break through. Although Yi Xian needed to use better resources to continue leveling up due to the increase in his strength, it didn't mean that it would be difficult for Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian had kept the ancient zither space's output for such a long time without using it. It was time to increase his strength. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to move an inch in the demon god's domain. Devour. Yi Xian directly said. The countless resources within the universe ring were quickly classified. The valuable ones were kept, and the rest were all transformed into Yi Xian's leveling experience and infused into his body. Breakthrough. 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 Continuous breakthroughs. Ding, system notification, host has broken through. Current realm, inferior 9th grade Divine Emperor realm. Yi Xian was very satisfied with raising his cultivation by so many levels in one go. Although he was still slightly inferior to Ouyang Shui, Yi Xian was very clear that if they were to really fight, Ouyang Shue's battle prowess might not be much stronger than his. After all, Yi Xian had raised Ouyang Shue's cultivation level. Coupled with the eruption of Ouyang Shue's special bloodline, this was the result. However, Ouyang Shui didn't have any battle experience, nor did she have any suitable divine abilities. Of course, Yi Xian would slowly settle all of this later. Let's go to the Aquamoon Cave. Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. Ouyang Shui was shocked at first, then asked, Big Brother Yi, why are we still going to the Aquamoon Cave? There are many divine beast experts gathered there. It's very dangerous. Yi Xian looked at Ouyang Shui and lightly smiled. Go kill someone. Right, Yi Xian was going to kill someone. In Yi Xian's heart, the demon god's domain wasn't the Kunlun god's domain, so there was no need for Yi Xian to hold back. Since these divine beasts didn't treat humans as living beings, then why would Yi Xian care about them? Let them become the stepping stones for Yi Xian to quickly increase his strength. The two of them walked together, quickly heading towards the subsidiary city of the Aquamoon Cave. This time, Yi Xian didn't have any scruples. Even if he didn't provoke Yi Xian would still make a move to cause trouble, let alone provoke him. The two of them once again arrived at the subsidiary city. At the beginning, they didn't encounter any trouble. However, not long after, Yi Xian found what he wanted. At this moment, Yi Xian was walking on the street, looking at the strange resources that the demon god's domain was selling. After all, there were some resources in the demon god's domain that didn't exist in the Kunlun god's domain. For example, this thing called the 3-star divine stone was something that the Kunlun god's domain had never heard of before. However, this 3-star divine stone had the special effect of strengthening the power of laws. By gathering a sufficient number of 3-star divine stones and refining the 3-star divine power within, one would be able to achieve the special effect of condensing the power of laws. Just as Yi Xian was about to buy some, he heard the roars of people and the neighing of horses in the distance. Get out of the way, get out of the way, all of you get out of the way. The young master of the Yi Karen family has arrived. Yi Karen's family? Yi Xian frowned slightly, but Ouyang Shui had already said to Yi Xian, Big Brother Yi might not know, but this Yi Karen family is a rather powerful family. This Yi Karen family has a divine sovereign level expert, and can be considered to be domineering in this area. Moreover, this Water Moon Cave subsidiary city can be considered to be the property of the Yi Karen family. It sounded like his strength wasn't bad, but Yi Xian didn't care about his background. Chapter 2848. The young master of the Yi Karen family. Brat, are you courting death? Hurry up and scram. Do you know who is here? A lackey ran over to Yi Xian's side. His strength was clearly only at the 6th level of the Divine King realm, but when he saw Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui, the two Divine Emperor realm experts, he didn't have the slightest bit of fear. After all, he represented the young master of the Yi Karen family. Who would dare to disobey him? But today, he just had to meet such a person. Yi Xian couldn't even be bothered to pay attention to this fellow. Since he was looking for trouble, how could Yi Xian be afraid at all? Seeing that Yi Xian wasn't moved, the lackey was clearly infuriated. He casually picked up a whip and lashed it towards Yi Xian. Pa! A crisp sound rang out. Of course, it was naturally impossible for it to hit Yi Xian. Instead, it whipped the shop owner to death. However, it was clear that the Yi Karen family was incomparably tyrannical. Even if their servants killed someone on the spot, not only did no one stop them, they even caused the surrounding people to take a few steps back. When the servant saw that he had killed someone, not only did he not show the slightest bit of fear, he even swaggered over. He glanced at that person and said without a care, "You deserve to die. You dare to block our young master's path? I think you don't want to live anymore." After saying this, the servant waved his whip again and swept it towards Yi Xian. At the same time he said, "And you, humph, you dare to block the young master's path. Kill without mercy." As the whip got closer and closer to Yi Xian, many of the surrounding people revealed expressions of reluctance. Actually, there were naturally some experts here who could defeat this servant, but this was a servant of the Yi Karen family. Moreover, he was the most beloved servant of the Yi Karen family, so no one dared to attack him. Therefore, everyone only thought in their hearts that another fellow was going to die under the whip. However, in the next moment, a scene that shocked them occurred. Just as the whip was about to hit Yi Xian, he heard Yi Xian's voice explode, "Scram!" In an instant, a long sword pounced towards the servant. How could a mere 6th-grade divine king be a match for Yi Xian? Wei Zhentian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and killed him before he could even react. Murder! Moreover, the one who died was a servant of the Yi Karen family. The surrounding divine beasts revealed expressions of shock, and some of them were so scared that they revealed their true forms. They couldn't help but be afraid. This was also a servant of the Karen family. Who would dare to offend the Yi Karen family in the affiliated city of the Water Moon Cave? At this moment, an angry voice rang out. Damn it, you actually dared to kill my servant. Kill them all. In an instant, a large group of servants charged forward once again and pounced towards Yi Xian. It was obvious that they wanted to kill him. Yi Xian wasn't afraid in the slightest, but his eyes were bright and full of spirit. In fact, Yi Xian already had an idea in his heart. The servants ran amok as they pounced towards Yi Xian, but Yi Xian didn't fight them head-on. Instead, he continuously dodged. Moreover, every time he dodged, he specifically dodged towards a place with a lot of people. These servants of the Yi Karen family were usually unbridled. How could they care so much? They continued to attack without stopping. Boom, boom, boom. Powerful attacks continued to explode, but they didn't affect Yi Xian at all. However, the surrounding passers-by were in deep trouble. In just a short period of time, more than a dozen people had already suffered an unexpected calamity. Perhaps ordinary passers-by could still avoid it, but the divine beasts that lived here or opened shops here couldn't avoid it so easily. A divine beast that opened a weapon shop wailed incomparably. Just a moment ago, the servants of the Yi Karen family had not only injured him, they had also destroyed his shop. Yi Xian purposely acted in an extremely sorry state as he continuously dodged. Those servants didn't care that much and tightly chased after Yi Xian. Along the way, they continuously destroyed and injured passers-by. Yi Xian smiled. This was the result he wanted. Suddenly, Yi Xian made his move. Under the control of Wei Zhentian, the god-slaughtering sword in his hand instantly flew out and killed a servant of the Yi Karen family. Moreover, Ouyang Shui, who was hiding in the shadows, had already received Yi Xian's instructions to kick a divine beast out. Because of the chaos, many people didn't understand the process at all. However, they did see that the divine beast that was watching the show was pouncing on a dead servant of the Yi Karen family. You dare to kill a member of my Yi Karen family. When a nearby servant saw this result, he immediately roared and was about to rush towards that person. That person was incomparably flustered as he loudly said, "It's not me, it's really not me." However, how could the servants of the Yi Karen family care so much? With a casual whip, they sent that person's head flying. At the same time, they erased that person's divine deity. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a slight smile as he continued his actions. As he dodged, he created chaos. Moreover, he didn't kill those servants, but only injured them. With Ouyang Shui's cooperation, not long after, there were already passers-by who attacked the servants of the Yi Karen family in order to survive. Damn it! You lowly commoners actually dare to offend this young master's dignity. Kill them all. It was the so-called young master of the Yi Karen family who spoke again. Hearing this, Yi Xian wished that he could ruthlessly praise the young master of the Yi Karen family. This was simply his teammate, not his enemy at all. This kind of cooperation, he had a tacit understanding. Hearing the words of the young master of the Yi Karen family, the servants didn't care so much and directly attacked the people around them. One had to know that their Yi Karen family had always been running rampant in this affiliated city. Killing a few people was something that couldn't be any more normal. After all, compared to the Kunlun God region, the Demon God region valued strength over strength. There weren't as many rules. At this moment, the moment these servants made a move, the divine beasts that were unwilling to be killed would naturally resist. As for Yi Xian, he immediately shouted, "Everyone, what are you waiting for? The Yi Karen family is not giving us a way out. Could it be that you are willing to be slaughtered by them at will? Everyone attack together, for the sake of survival, for the sake of our own lives." Yi Xian's voice naturally resonated with countless people. After all, the current situation was already obvious. The Yi Karen family was already prepared to kill them all. If they didn't resist, then there really wouldn't be a way out. All right, everyone attack together. Even if we die, we can't die in such a cowardly manner. Everyone, Resist them together. Someone loudly replied to Yi Xian. With the first, there would naturally be a second. Very soon, the entire street was filled with the sound of voices rising and falling. How could Yi Xian let go of such a good opportunity? If he didn't make a move now, when would he? At this moment, the streets were already in chaos. Chapter 28:49. Back to the Water Moon Cave, the servants of Yi Karen's family had already noticed the abnormality. After all, it was normal for them to kill a few people in this subsidiary city. But now, these lowly commoners actually dared to resist them. This was simply unbearable. However, there were also some smart people who knew that this was not the time to fight. After all, if anything happened to the young lord, they would be able to take responsibility. However, how could it be that easy for them to quell the chaos now? Yi Xian continuously wandered through the crowd. Wei Zhontian controlled the god-slaughtering sword and would occasionally kill a person. The people he killed were all ordinary passers-by who weren't involved in the chaos. One by one, the passers-by were constantly killed. In addition to the chaos in the surroundings, more people were naturally sucked into the vortex. In fact, the Yi Karen family knew very well that they were not welcome in this subsidiary city. Therefore, whenever they went out, they would bring hundreds of guards with them. However, the current situation was that these hundreds of guards were no longer enough. Compared to the chaotic crowd, these guards were like a drop in the bucket. The onslaught of the crowd forced the guards to defend with their lives to prevent the young master from getting hurt. The conflict had already arisen. How could it be so easy to reconcile? Not to mention that Yi Xian was intentionally causing trouble. Ouyang Shui was following Yi Xian's orders to cause chaos, but suddenly, she was pulled to the side by Yi Xian. "Hurry up and leave," Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. "Why do we have to leave? The current situation is very advantageous to us. Why don't we assassinate the young master of the Yi Karen family first?" Ouyang Shui's words caused Yi Xian to be slightly stunned. Yi Xian didn't expect Ouyang Shui to be so bold. It wasn't that Yi Xian hadn't thought of assassinating the young master of the Yi Karen family. However, he didn't want to do so. After all, assassinating the young master of the Yi Karen family would definitely bring him a lot of unnecessary trouble. In any case, the current chaos had already achieved the effect that Yi Xian had expected, so there was no need to add more trouble. Yi Xian's plan was actually very simple. He wanted to stir up chaos within the demon realm. Of course, he was only in a subsidiary city of the Water Moon Cave. This time, Yi Xian was only testing his strength. Yi Xian already had a complete plan in his heart. He wanted to make the interior of the demon realm restless. Therefore, there was no need for Yi Xian to suggest assassinating young master Yi Karen. Alright, the current result is already very good. Moreover, even if we don't make a move, I'm afraid that young lord won't be able to survive. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a smile. This was because he'd already seen that there were already quite a few divine kings and even divine emperors involved in this internal strife. Some people hoped to obtain benefits from helping the Yi Karen family, but even more people could no longer suppress the anger in their hearts and directly attacked the Yi Karen family. This way, it directly led to a chaotic battle between the two forces in this subsidiary city. The people from both sides were already in a killing frenzy. The more they killed, the more people would be drawn into it. It would not be so easy to pacify the chaos in this subsidiary city of the Water Moon abode. Yi Xian brought Ouyang Shui and quickly left. Not long after they left, thousands of family guards, servants, and servants rushed out from the Yi Karen family. These people had received news that the young master was trapped, so they rushed over to support him. Once these people joined in, other than escalating the conflict, it wouldn't be of much use. Not long after Yi Xian left, the entire subsidiary city fell into chaos. Not long after, the young master died at the hands of an expert. Once the young master of the Yi Karen family died, how could the Yi Karen family let this matter rest? Thus, this battle continued for many days without stopping. Of course, it was inevitable that this news would spread. Some people felt that those lowly commoners were courting death by openly rebelling against the powerful Yi Karen family, while others felt that the Yi Karen family had gone too far. But no matter what, Yi Xian's goal of intensifying the conflict had been achieved. 5 days later, a man and a woman once again arrived at the subsidiary city. At this moment, the subsidiary city was clearly much more desolate, and there were far fewer pedestrians on the streets. There were even traces of battles left in many places. These two people were undoubtedly Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui. At this moment, Ouyang Shui had a smile on her face. She was very satisfied with this result. After all, the conflict between the human race and the divine beasts in the demon god's divine realm was simply impossible to reconcile. The human race in the demon god's divine realm naturally hoped that all the divine beasts would die overnight. After all, only then would they be able to obtain a place to live. Although that kind of thinking was almost impossible to achieve, it wouldn't stop Ouyang Shui from being happy from the bottom of her heart because of the riots in the subsidiary cities and the deaths of so many experts from the demon god's divine realm. As for Yi Xian, he didn't feel anything. After all, to Yi Xian, this was only a small part of his plan. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't care about the deaths of these divine beasts at all. No matter how many died, Yi Xian could only watch in silence. This time, it was obvious that the entire subsidiary city had fallen into silence. Because of the great purge of the Yi Karen family, many divine beasts were either killed or chose to leave this place. Yi Xian's arrival wasn't welcomed like before. The people who stayed behind only coldly looked at Yi Xian. Of course, Yi Xian didn't care that much. This time, Yi Xian was just passing by. As a subsidiary city, it was a necessary path to the Water Moon Cave. If it wasn't for this, Yi Xian probably wouldn't have come here. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui's speed was very fast. Not long after, the two of them passed through the subsidiary city. At this moment, the two of them had already arrived outside the Water Moon Cave. The Water Moon Cave was a place where geniuses gathered. It was one of the more famous caves in the demon god's divine realm. This way, the interrogation would be rather strict. Those who didn't have the qualifications to enter this place would definitely not have the chance to enter. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui hadn't gone far when they were stopped by the two of them. "Halt, show me your medallions." Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the two of them as he asked, "What medallion?" One of them looked at Yi Xian and indifferently said, "Why did the two of you come here? If you're here to learn, then show your invitation medallion. If you're here to visit, then show your visiting medallion." The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly, but he didn't say anything. Instead, Ouyang Shui coldly said, "We're here to kill people. Do we also need to show our killing medallions?" The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. Chapter 2850. Elder blocking the way. Who would have thought that the two guards of the Water Moon Cave would look at each other and laugh out loud? "Haha, you two kids. Did you come here on purpose to tease us? Come to my Water Moon Cave to kill people? This is the funniest joke I've ever heard." Was it really a joke? Suddenly, a cold light flashed. The person who was laughing complacently suddenly stopped laughing. There was only fear in his eyes because that cold light had already taken his life. "You, who exactly are you people?" The remaining guard was a sensible person. If Yi Xian could instantly kill his companion, then he could naturally kill him. Therefore, he didn't escape at all because he knew very well that he wouldn't be able to escape. However, Yi Xian didn't pay any attention to that person. As soon as that person finished speaking, Wei Zhentian had already controlled the god-slaughtering sword to fly back and kill him. "I've already told you that we're here to kill people. It's you who didn't believe us. You can't blame us," Ouyang Shui said indifferently. Yi Xian didn't care too much about it. With a casual wave of his hand, he devoured the two divine beast guards along with their universe rings. After doing all of this, Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui continued forward. Along the way, it could be said that they would kill anyone they saw. Although the Water Moon Cave was a gathering place of geniuses in the demon god's domain, how could ordinary guards be a match for Yi Xian? In a short moment, they arrived outside the Water Moon Cave. At this moment, Yi Xian finally met an expert, an elder of the Water Moon Cave. At this moment, just like before, Yi Xian casually killed the two guards. And at this moment, a voice rang out. "How dare you? Who are you? How dare you kill people in my Water Moon Cave? Don't tell me you don't want to live anymore." Along with this voice, three figures directly descended. A divine beast with a bull's head and a human's body was holding a magic treasure that looked like a wolf's fang. Behind him were two divine beasts dressed in blue robes. This divine beast with the head of a cow was the enforcement elder of the Water Moon Cave. Originally, he was just passing by, but he didn't expect to encounter the scene of Yi Xian killing the guards.
The sudden appearance of the three people caused Xianxia to be slightly stunned. However, she wasn't afraid at all. Looking at the three of them, Xianxia said, "Another three people have come to die." Along the way, Xian had deliberately trained Xianxia and allowed her to personally kill a few divine beasts with average strength. Of course, most of the time, it was still Xian who personally took action. At this moment when he saw the three of them, Xian only asked the system, detect the strength of these three people. Ding, system notification, designated target, a 1st grade Divine Emperor Stage Water Moon Cave Elder, 2 7th grade Divine King Stage Water Moon Cave Guards. It could be said that Xian had enough confidence in killing the three of them. But this time, Xian didn't move. Instead, he said to Xianxia, "Go, I'll leave these three to you." No matter what, Xianxia was an expert at the peak of the 9th level of the Divine Emperor stage. It was just that she had just obtained her strength and didn't have enough valuable abilities. But without a doubt, the best way to increase his strength was to fight. That was why Xian had Xianxia make a move. Xian wanted to train Xianxia. Xianxia already had incomparable trust in Xian. She understood that since Xian had asked her to make a move, it naturally meant that he had the ability to kill the three of them. Thus, without any hesitation, she directly pulled out her sword and charged forward. This sword was a magic treasure that Xian had given him. It was naturally much weaker than the god-slaughtering sword, but it could still be considered extraordinary. "Kill!" Xianxia shouted as the divine sword in her hand slashed down. The elder was not afraid at all. With a wave of the mace in his hand, he blocked Xianxia's attack. At the same time, the countless sharp spikes on the mace suddenly burst into a ball of light, instantly covering the entire sky. Those sharp shadows of light, without a moment of hesitation, directly surrounded Xianxia. Wei Zhentian controlled the two god-slaughtering swords to surround Xian, but Xian didn't move at all. If Xianxia, with her cultivation at the 9th grade Divine Emperor realm, couldn't even do anything to a 1st grade Divine Emperor realm elder of the Water Moon Cave, then Xian would even consider not nurturing her. At this moment, Xianxia's expression was solemn. The magic treasure in her hand flew up and down, and at the same time, a ray of light lit up from her body. This was the power of law that Xianxia had comprehended. However, even Xian felt a little strange about this law. This power of law wasn't any law that Xian had mastered, and it could even be said to be extremely rare. What Xianxia had mastered was actually the light speed domain law. As the name suggested, the power of this law was the light domain. The speed of light was already considered extremely fast, and the light domain was to bind the power of light within a certain range. Moreover, it could continue to accelerate, even to 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times the speed of light. That speed was even faster than teleportation, and even more terrifying than the power of the law of space. After all, the power of the light domain law was different from the power of the law of space, or the power of other laws. This was a special power of law that could maintain peak speed and still be able to fight continuously. As the light of the laws rose, Xianxia's figure turned into a ray of light. Not to mention the naked eye, even the divine sense was unable to detect a mysterious light. At the same time, Xianxia's immature light domain was also activated. The terrifying speed had turned into the most advantageous attack method. Even though the elder's spiritual will was incomparably powerful and could already reach the initial stage of prediction. However, in the blink of an eye, he had already been struck to the ground. Because, in the blink of an eye, Xianxia had already launched over 100 surprise attacks. Of course, at the same time that the elder fell, the other two guards had also fallen. Xianxia stopped her things and looked at Xian with watery eyes. Xian naturally understood what she wanted to express. He slightly nodded and indifferently said, "Your performance this time is not bad." "Thank you, big brother Yi." Xianxia suppressed the excitement in her heart and said excitedly. However, although the speed at which Xianxia killed the elder wasn't slow, it still gave the elder enough time to send out a signal. At this moment, the Water Moon Cave had already received the signal to invade. However, because the time was too short, the elder only had time to send out the invasion signal. He didn't say where it was or who it was. Therefore, in the Water Moon Cave, he could only raise his guard, but he didn't know where the danger came from. Especially when they discovered that the guards had mysteriously disappeared, it made the Water Moon Cave even more vigilant. With a casual wave of Xian's hand, the corpses of the three people, along with their universe rings,
were devoured by Yi Xian.
Ding. System notification. Host has broken through.
Current level 1 Divine Emperor. He didn't expect that this elder, who was a mid-level Divine Emperor, would only be able to raise Yi Xian's level by 1.
Of course, Yi Xian didn't care about this.
He'd already decided in his heart that if he wanted to fight to his heart's content in the demon god's domain, it wouldn't be difficult for him to raise his realm.
Chapter 2851.
Organizations and primogenitors. At this moment, a group of god-beast geniuses from the demon god realm were studying as usual.
Of course, there were also some people discussing delicacies.
It seemed that the experts of the demon god realm pursued delicacies more than the experts of the Kunlun god realm. However, the delicacies in their mouths could never be separated from one word, and that was the human race. In the eyes of the divine beasts of the demon god realm, only the human race was the most delicious food. Such words only made Yi Xian more certain that he didn't do anything wrong in killing the experts of the demon god realm and the heaven realm.
At this moment, Yi Xian's figure flashed and appeared in front of a genius from the demon god realm.
The god-slaughtering sword suddenly rested on that person's neck without any warning. After all, that genius didn't expect that there would be someone who wanted to kill him in the water-moon cave. Answer whatever I say next, but if you hesitate, be careful of your life.
Yi Xian said indifferently to that person.
That person didn't hesitate at all and nodded repeatedly. Let me ask you, what's going on with the holy son of the demon god realm? Yi Xian knew that Luo Luo seemed to have been treated as some kind of holy son. Of course, there might be other names, but the meaning was similar. The reason why Yi Xian couldn't find Luo Luo's whereabouts was because of her identity as the holy son. Replying to Senior, the holy son is summoned by the ancestor of the demon god realm. Only the genius chosen by the ancestor can be called the holy son and enjoy endless glory. That person didn't know why Yi Xian would suddenly ask such a question. After all, everyone in the demon god realm knew about the holy son. However, since Yi Xian asked, he didn't dare to hide it.
A genius chosen by the ancestor? Yi Xian frowned.
Actually, Yi Xian had investigated what the holy son was before, but no one seemed to know. Even if they did, there would be different versions. Who would have thought that the answer he got from entering the demon god realm this time would be related to the ancestor? Although Yi Xian didn't know much about the so-called ancestor, it wasn't like he hadn't heard of it. After all, Yi Xian still had some mysterious blood in his hands. Back then, when Yi Xian detonated this blood, he'd heard the people of the demon god realm roar about the return of the ancestor. In short, it seemed that this ancestor was extremely important and mysterious in the demon god realm. Now that he heard the ancestor mentioned again, Yi Xian couldn't help but be puzzled. What is the ancestor?
Yi Xian couldn't help but ask.
You actually don't know the ancestor. He didn't expect that even though his life was in Yi Xian's hands, the divine beast still dared to ask him a question. However, this fellow immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing, so he quickly added, "The primogenitor is the origin of our monster god celestial realm. According to legend, every divine beast has a powerful primogenitor. The power of the primogenitor is the source of the special race mystique of every race in the monster god celestial realm. All of our race talents are actually bestowed by the primogenitor. Although the ancestor disappeared hundreds of millions of years ago, the ancestor's power is everywhere. Moreover, almost every once in a while, someone will obtain a powerful power through the ancestor's blessing. I heard that someone tried to return the ancestor's power, but I don't know if it's true or not." That person continued to narrate, but Yi Xian thought of another power.
Organization extermination.
It could be said that Yi Xian had already wiped out the organization from the Kunlun divine domain with lightning speed. However, this didn't mean that the organization had completely disappeared. In fact, there were still remnants of the organization in other divine realms. However, what did the destruction of the organization have to do with the power of the ancestor? On the surface, there seemed to be no relationship between the two. However, Yi Xian had fought with the organization countless times, so he knew in his heart that the organization wasn't that simple. Or rather, the organization wasn't as he had imagined, and it had nothing to do with the power of the ancestor. After all, wasn't the organization also trying to summon some kind of mysterious power? It also had the so-called ancestral return ceremony. Could there be some kind of connection between the two?
Yi Xian didn't know.
However, Yi Xian knew that regardless of whether it was the organization or the ancestor, he couldn't let them appear. After all,
They were incomparably evil. However, if the organization was really summoning the power of the ancestor of the demon god's divine domain, then Yi Xian wouldn't be able to understand it. One had to know that almost all of the members of the organization were humans. Moreover, there was no direct connection between them and the demon god's divine domain. Yi Xian couldn't ignore the fact that the two unrelated forces were thinking about the ancestor's power. However, Yi Xian didn't know anything about the ancestor's power. Moreover, very few people knew about it. Even if they could hear some of it, it would only be a legendary existence. No one could be sure if there was any ancestor's power. Yi Xian put away the doubts in his heart and continued to ask that person, "Where can I find the whereabouts of the Holy Sun?" That person immediately stopped chattering, but said hesitantly, "May I ask, Senior, which Holy Sun are you trying to find?" The total number of Holy Suns had always been a secret. Rumor had it that as long as there was a race of divine beasts in the demon god's divine domain, there would be a Holy Sun. However, the place that every Holy Sun stayed in was not the same. Most of the Holy Suns are secretly protected by their own clans, and a portion of the Holy Suns are controlled by the Lord Divine Lord. There are also a portion of the Holy Suns who have accepted the test of their strength and are constantly wandering around. This kind of answer caused Yi Xian to be extremely dissatisfied. This was because saying it was equivalent to not saying it at all. It wouldn't be of any help to Yi Xian at all. Although this fellow was very cooperative, it was a pity that the information he knew wasn't what Yi Xian wanted. Thus, with a thought from Yi Xian, Wei Zhenqian directly controlled the god-slaughtering sword and killed it without the slightest hesitation. "Come, let's continue forward," Yi Xian said to Ouyang Shui. Soon, the two of them left. Actually, Yi Xian couldn't bear to kill like this because he knew that some divine beasts didn't deserve to die. However, Yi Xian was even more clear that this was the demon god's divine domain, not the Kunlun divine domain. As a human, he was an anomaly in the demon god's divine domain. If he wasn't cruel, then he would only be treated cruelly by the divine beasts of the demon god's divine domain. Either he chose to be casually humiliated by others, or he could only be ruthless. In the demon god's divine domain, at least most of the divine beasts weren't innocent. That was why Yi Xian was so merciless. Right now, Yi Xian was alone. Any mishap might result in his death. If he wanted to live, he had to be vigilant at all times, and he couldn't be merciful at all. Of course, Yi Xian wouldn't hesitate in the slightest to kill these divine beasts, even if they were in human form. Chapter 2852. Follow me if you want to live very quickly. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui found another target. This time, it was a genius that the divine beast geniuses of the Water Moon Cave called Tian Ting. This person's original body was a heaven-listening beast. The heaven-listening beast had a very special divine ability, and that was the heaven-listening divine ability. It was said that the heaven-listening divine ability allowed the heaven-listening beast to hear any sound it wanted to hear, whether it was the sound of millions of years ago or the sound of countless miles away. Even when the divine ability was cultivated to a high realm, it could hear the sound of the future. The heaven-listening beast's heaven-listening ability was extremely strange and unfathomable. However, it also had many restrictions. But no matter what, in Yi Xian's eyes, this heaven-listening beast was undoubtedly a very good choice. Yi Xian believed that this fellow might be able to grasp some secrets that others didn't know about. Then, if Yi Xian didn't look for him, who else would he look for? However, Tian Ting was different from the others. He didn't know if it was because he was pretending to be deep or something, but this fellow rarely appeared in front of others. At this moment, Yi Xian wanted to find him, but he didn't know how. However, Yi Xian didn't know that Tian Ting had already been taken away by the elders of the Water Moon Cave. It turned out that after the elders of the Water Moon Cave found out that a law enforcement elder had died, they also found out that several guards had died. With so many people dying, it naturally attracted the attention of the elders of the Water Moon Cave. Thus, they found Tian Ting and promised him great benefits, hoping that Tian Ting would be able to use his innate ability to find out who the killer was. "How is it? What did you gain this time?" an elder said to Tian Ting. At this moment, Tian Ting was standing in a large formation. This formation was completely made of spirit stones, and every time it was activated, it would require at least 100,000 spirit stones to activate. To maintain it, it would require no less than 1,000,000 spirit stones. With such a huge consumption, it was no wonder that Tian Ting's innate ability wouldn't be activated so easily. At this moment,
The Water Moon Cave was only willing to spend so much money because so many people had died consecutively. In fact, Tianting had already used up tens of millions of spirit stones. Unfortunately, he still hadn't gained anything. When Tianting heard the elder's question, he helplessly shook his head. This time, he still followed the elder's instructions and chose to use the Heaven's Listening ability. However, he didn't hear any useful information. However, he also remembered Yi Xian's voice. Unfortunately, just relying on his voice didn't seem to be of much use. Of course, if Yi Xian knew that Tianting's divine ability was so powerful, he'd probably be glad that he didn't say anything. Otherwise, his identity would have already been exposed. Hearing Tianting's reply, the elders didn't give up. With a wave of their hands, another batch of spirit stones was added to the formation. It doesn't matter. Continue to investigate. I don't believe that guy didn't leave any clues behind. An elder said to Tianting. Tianting naturally wouldn't refuse. Normally, it wouldn't be so easy to obtain an opportunity to train his divine ability. Now that there was a cave elder willing to spend spirit stones for him to train his divine ability, he naturally wouldn't mind. At this moment, Yi Xian was also searching for Tianting's whereabouts. After another failure, Tianting had already searched all the locations that the elders of the Water Moon Cave knew. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. He had already spent a total of 20 million spirit stones. This could already be said to have reached the limit of what the elders of the Water Moon Cave could bear. Helplessly, these elders could only give up on relying on Tianting to find clues. Tianting left the elders' place with incomparable doubts in his heart. Just who was it that could make the elders care so much? After all, these elders didn't tell Tianting what had happened. Therefore, Tianting had no way of knowing. However, not long after he walked out, he saw a man and a woman walking towards him. Tianting didn't mind. He thought that it was just an ordinary disciple of the cave. However, when the two of them arrived beside Tianting, they said to him, "You are Tianting?" Tianting was slightly taken aback. He could be considered a famous person in the Water Moon Cave, and almost everyone knew him. Now that these two people had asked him a question, Tianting was a little confused. However, Tianting still subconsciously nodded his head. "Yes, I am Tianting." Following this reply, Tianting suddenly felt an incomparably terrifying aura. At the same time, two powerful divine swords had already locked onto him. All of this happened too quickly, so quickly that Tianting didn't even have time to react. Of course, even if he wanted to react, he probably wouldn't be a match for Yi Xian. After all, Tianting was only talented, but it didn't mean that he was strong. In reality, Tianting was only a mere divine lord. In front of Yi Xian, he didn't even have the slightest chance. "If you want to live, then follow me obediently," Yi Xian said indifferently. At this moment, Tianting seemed to have understood something. Unfortunately, even if he understood, he was powerless to resist. Facing the powerful Yi Xian, Tianting didn't even have the qualifications to speak. The two god-slaughtering swords could break his divine deity at any time, so how could he resist at all? Tianting was incomparably shocked, but he could only helplessly follow Yi Xian forward. Not long after, the three of them arrived at a remote place. Yi Xian casually waved his hand and a divine talisman transformed into a simple formation that enveloped the three of them. The function of this divine talisman was to conceal itself. It could be said that the effect was very simple. However, unless someone deliberately investigated this place, they wouldn't be able to discover anything special about this place. Next, answer whatever I ask you. If I'm satisfied with your answer, I can spare your life. Otherwise, Tianting naturally understood what Yi Xian wanted to say. After all, Tianting already knew of Yi Xian's identity. This fellow was the expert who'd killed all the guards and even the elders along the way, and then infiltrated the Water Moon Cave. Tianting had the urge to cry in his heart. He never thought that such an expert would actually come looking for him. Of course, he also knew why Yi Xian did this. Actually, it was also because of his divine ability. Yi Xian had also taken a fancy to his special ability. For the first time, Tianting regretted having this ability. At this moment, it was originally worth showing off. The innate ability that countless people envied had brought him great trouble. Let me ask you, how much do you know about the Holy Sun? Yi Xian indifferently asked. At the same time, a powerful pressure was emitted from his body, causing Tian Ting to not dare to hide anything. Tian Ting quickly started to answer, but he didn't let Yi Xian get much of what he wanted. However, Yi Xian knew that Tian Ting wasn't lying. After all, what Tian Ting had heard was exactly what Yi Xian knew before. Chapter 2853. The Dharma idol opened again this time. The question caused Tian Ting to hesitate slightly. It wasn't that Tian Ting wanted to hide anything, but the answer seemed to be something that everyone knew. Of course, Tian Ting did not dare to hesitate as he replied right away. The only way to enter the Master God battlefield is through the teleportation tokens bestowed by the Divine Masters and the Heavenly Kings. After all, the moment the Master God battlefield closes, that place will become a forbidden zone. As for the Kunlun God region, I have heard of some secret passageways that can be used to enter. However, after the previous war with the Kunlun God region, those secret passageways have been sealed as well.
So there's no other way.
Yi Xian frowned slightly. That day he thought that Yi Xian was angry, so he quickly continued. No, it's not like there's no chance at all. This lowly one once heard that in the 8 great divine general palaces, each of them has a special secret realm. That secret realm leads to both the Kunlun divine realm and the demon god divine realm. Yi Xian frowned once again. What's the use of this? Don't tell me you want me to kill those divine generals and snatch the two-way secret realm? Tian Ting was at a loss for words. He hurriedly tried to say something. However, Yi Xian waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything else. This was because the information provided by Tian Ting didn't seem to be really useful. Of course, knowing that there were 8 two-way secret realms was not bad. Perhaps he could give it a try in the future. Yi Xian looked at the Heaven Listener Beast. The Heaven Listener Beast's innate ability wasn't bad, so it could be used by Yi Xian. It would be a pity to kill it just like that. With a casual wave of his hand, he directly absorbed the Heaven Listener Beast into the devouring space. After all, once it entered the devouring space, the Heaven Listener Beast would be completely under Yi Xian's control. From then on, it wouldn't be able to go against Yi Xian's wishes. Who said that Yi Xian knew in his heart that the Heaven Listener Beast wouldn't be of much use for a short period of time after being absorbed into the devouring space. However, as the Tree of Law grew, the devouring space would gradually become stronger. It might be useful in the future. Unexpectedly, even the Heaven Listener Beast didn't have too many clues. Yi Xian shook his head in disappointment. His gaze quickly gathered on the surrounding divine beasts. These divine beasts were all geniuses of the demon god's domain. Perhaps in the future, they would become the enemies of the Kunlun divine domain and Yi Xian. Thus, at this moment, Yi Xian hardened his heart and prepared to kill them all. Rather than keeping these geniuses of the demon god's domain as enemies in the future, it was better to kill them all now. That's right, Yi Xian wanted to kill everyone because he knew very well that sooner or later, the people here would become enemies of the Kunlun divine domain and Yi Xian himself. Moreover, even if Yi Xian didn't make a move, Xianxia probably wouldn't let these people off. It could be said that there were almost none of these geniuses who hadn't eaten humans before. In the eyes of these so-called geniuses of the demon god's domain, humans were just food. Then, what reason did Yi Xian have to give them a chance to live? Wei Zhentian, magic treasure form, kill for me. Following Yi Xian's order, Wei Zhentian instantly moved and directly controlled the 2 god-slaughtering swords to charge out. At the same time, Xianxia also charged out. Ever since the establishment of the Water Moon Cave, this was the first time it had encountered a bloodbath. Another meaning of a genius was that one's strength was insufficient. The reason why they were called geniuses was because their potential was very high, but it didn't mean that they were very strong. Perhaps in the future, they would all be able to become experts, but at least for now, they didn't have that kind of strength, and Yi Xian wouldn't give them the time to grow. The god-slaughtering sword danced continuously, and one genius after another fell. Within the entire Water Moon Cave, wails could be heard incessantly. One by one, the divine beast geniuses transformed into their true forms in an attempt to resist or escape. Unfortunately, it was useless. Yi Xian and Xianxia were like 2 gods of death as they slaughtered their way through. 1, 2, 3. Yi Xian couldn't be bothered to remember how many divine beast geniuses he'd killed because there was no need. In any case, as long as an enemy appeared in his field of vision, not a single one of them would escape. However, this kind of devastation didn't last long. During this period of time, The elders of the Water Moon Cave had never stopped searching for Yixian and Ouyang Shui. Now that the two of them had appeared, they naturally attracted the attacks of the elders. "Brat, how dare you be so impudent in my Water Moon Cave? You're courting death." An elder quickly charged towards Yixian. His body continuously emitted a powerful light, and as he charged towards Yixian, he'd already activated his innate ability. It could be said that he was the pride of the porcupine race. After all, the porcupine's talent was generally low, and it was rare for them to be able to cultivate to the Divine Emperor realm. And this Divine Beast expert was an inferior 7th-grade deity emperor. Unfortunately, a mere inferior 7th-grade deity emperor was nothing in front of Yixian. Even Yixian couldn't be bothered to recall the god-slaughtering sword. He merely casually punched out, and a powerful force instantly exploded out. Boom! With a single punch, Yixian sent the porcupine elder flying with just a single punch. However, this punch didn't take the porcupine elder's life. The porcupine elder was sent flying by Yixian's punch, and his heart was filled with fear. He stood in the distance, continuously coughing up blood, and didn't dare to move forward. However, at this moment, the other two elders had already arrived. The two of them first glanced at the porcupine elder, then looked at each other, and rushed towards Yixian. Ding! System prompt. Target is a middle 4th-grade deity emperor. Host is advised to dodge immediately. 3 levels higher than Yixian? He was indeed very strong, but don't think that Yixian's title of Eternal Sovereign was just for show. It was only 3 levels higher, but Yixian still didn't put it in his eyes. The two elders transformed into their original forms, because the two of them were the kind of divine beasts that could only display their greatest combat strength in their original forms. These two elders were actually a tiger and a lion. Roar! 2 furious roars rang out, and these two powerful divine beasts had already launched their attacks. A tiger's roar and lion's roar came from the very beginning. A violent sound wave instantly exploded, forming a huge whirlwind that charged towards Yixian. However, Yixian didn't place this kind of attack in his eyes. With a casual wave of his hand, a powerful force was unleashed, directly dispersing the whirlwind. However, the two great divine beast elders had already attacked once again. After the two of them transformed into their original forms, they didn't use any magic treasures, because their original forms had long since been trained to surpass most magic treasures. Even if they casually waved their hands, there would be a huge flash of claw light that wasn't any weaker than the light of an ordinary magic treasure. Yixian's eyes narrowed. He clasped his hands together and immediately activated a Dharma idol. Glorious Empress Dharma idol. The Glorious Empress was once an expert of the God Realm continent. The few great abilities she was proficient in could be said to be unsolvable. Chapter 2854. The Glorious Empress. The second divine power was called the Glorious Glory. It was a divine power that used the law of light's power to condense a gigantic singularity and unleash an explosive attack. This divine power could cause great damage within a certain range within a short period of time. Combined with the first divine power, it could naturally cause great damage to the enemy. Apart from these two divine powers, the third divine power was undoubtedly even more terrifying. The third divine power was called the Glorious Annihilation. Once this divine power was activated, the target that was locked on would be continuously injured by the gigantic light pillar that descended from the sky as long as it was under the light. These divine powers of the body of 10,000 venerables were difficult to obtain and had a long cooldown period. However, there was no doubt that the explosive damage was extremely terrifying. At this moment, Yixian summoned the Glorious Empress Dharma idol. The moment it appeared, a terrifying pressure descended. The two elders were slightly astonished, but they didn't give up on attacking. Instead, they continued to pounce towards Yixian. As the two elders charged forward, they actually fused together and activated their combined ability, the Tiger Lion Berserk Demon. The Tiger Lion Berserk Demon was a fusion skill that the two elders had perfected over tens of thousands of years of tacit understanding. It could be said that once the two of them activated this sacred art, it would be equivalent to perfectly fusing their strength together. The explosive attack power was not as simple as 1+1. Wherever the two of them ran, the clouds would disperse. Because their speed was too fast, there was actually an extremely powerful tornado protecting their bodies. Unfortunately, even so, it was useless. Dance for me. A smile hung on the corner of Yixian's mouth. With a casual wave of his hand, The Dance of Glory divine ability immediately descended. The two elders were stunned to discover that their bodies had involuntarily stopped. They were even pulled by some mysterious power of the law, causing them to dance on the spot. Although this period of time was very short, it was enough to make them panic because Yi Xian's new attack had already arrived. Glory of glory! A huge ball of light surrounded the two of them, and then the ball of light quickly shrank. Yi Xian looked at the ball of light and lightly said, "Bam!" At the same time Yi Xian spoke, the ball of light had already condensed to its limit. With a loud bang, it directly exploded. Boom! With a loud sound, the constantly condensing light energy exploded in an instant. The powerful force directly wrapped around the two elders. After the explosion, the two elders were already covered in blood and had no choice but to fall to the ground. At the same time that he landed, Yi Xian didn't plan on letting them go. Glorious annihilation! A ray of light descended from the sky. The two elders had previously stood together because they had used the fusion divine ability, but now, they had become the root of their deaths. In an instant, even the elders felt as if their bodies were melting. As a matter of fact, their bodies were indeed melting. The power of the law of light, no matter how tough your body was, as long as it wasn't truly unbreakable, then it could be refined. This glorious annihilation borrowed the laws of light, but it used artifact forging to kill the enemy. In other words, the glorious annihilation used the enemies in the light as materials to refine. Of course, this refinement would never have any results, because the final result would be to be melted. What a terrifying scene! Two powerful elders of the Watermoon Cave had actually melted in front of everyone's eyes. At this moment, the surrounding elders didn't dare to make a move. They all looked at Yi Xian in fear. One of them loudly asked Yi Xian, "Who exactly are you? What grudge do you have with my Watermoon Cave?" My Watermoon Cave is a public cave built in response to the orders of the Divine Lord. Any genius can enter to cultivate and stand aloof from worldly affairs. Why are you looking for trouble with my Watermoon Cave? Yi Xian silently shook his head. Perhaps in this demon god's divine domain, your Watermoon Cave is aloof from worldly affairs. Unfortunately, the divine beast geniuses you've nurtured will sooner or later appear in the main god battlefield and become enemies with the Kunlun divine domain. Then, it's impossible for Yi Xian to let them go. Yi Xian didn't pay any attention to the elders. With a casual wave of his hand, he directly devoured the universe rings left behind by the tiger and lion elders. Yi Xian's calmness made the surrounding elders unable to make up their minds. After all, no one knew what kind of trump card Yi Xian had. As for Ouyang Shui, relying on her high cultivation, although she didn't have Yi Xian's powerful methods, she'd still killed several elders of the demon god's divine domain. The two of them had already killed countless divine beast geniuses. What exactly do you want? Why are you making an enemy out of my Watermoon Cave? If my Watermoon Cave is in the wrong, then we are willing to compensate you for your losses. Please stop immediately. Another elder spoke. This elder's original body was a dark Qilin, so there was a constant flow of black gas around him. Yi Xian indifferently looked at these people, but he didn't really intend to let go. Of course, Yi Xian knew in his heart that once all of these elders attacked, even Yi Xian wouldn't be able to hold on. Moreover, the cave master of the Watermoon Cave and the other experts hadn't appeared yet. Once they appeared, Yi Xian probably wouldn't be a match for them at all. Yi Xian understood the principle of stopping while he was ahead. However, if he didn't ruthlessly extort the Watermoon Cave, then it would be a waste. All right, I can stop. However, the disciples of your Watermoon Cave devoured my clansmen. How are we going to settle this? Yi Xian's words weren't fake at all. Weren't humans treated as food by these divine beasts? However, Yi Xian didn't say that he was a human. After all, if he said that he was a human, it would only cause those elders to attack him crazily. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the elders seemed to understand something, but it was obvious that they had misunderstood. In the demon god's celestial territory, it was very normal for many powerful races to treat the weaker races as food. However, the prerequisite for this was strength. If one's strength wasn't enough, then they would be eaten by others instead. That would be their own misfortune. At this moment, those elders had clearly misunderstood Yi Xian's intentions. They thought that one of Yi Xian's clansmen had been killed and devoured by a disciple of the Watermoon Cave, so they'd come to take revenge. So that's how it is. However, you are being a little unreasonable.
Which clan disciple of my Watermoon Cave did such a thing? You can find trouble with his clan. Why are you targeting my entire Watermoon Cave? Oh, is that so? Then those disciples said that they were disciples of the Watermoon Cave and no one dared to hurt them. How do you explain this? In any case, it was all nonsense. Yi Xian didn't care that much. What? There's actually such a thing. Hearing Yi Xian's reply, the elders were obviously a little angry. At this moment, a red figure descended from the sky. Greetings, Grand Elder. So it was the Grand Elder of the Watermoon Cave who had arrived. Ding. System prompt. Target. High 7th grade Divine Emperor. Suggest host dodge immediately. Chapter 2855. Deterrence. It could be said that it was impossible for Yi Xian to resist. Yi Xian was inwardly vigilant. He'd already decided that if the Great Elder made a move, he'd immediately flee. However, the Great Elder's next words caused Yi Xian to stop in his tracks. Since it's the fault of my Watermoon Cave's disciple, then this compensation must be given. Brat, the resources in this universe ring can be considered your compensation. With a wave of his hand, he actually gave Yi Xian a universe ring. Yi Xian was puzzled. Why was this guy so easy to talk to? No, I'm afraid things aren't that simple. Sure enough, at this moment the Great Elder spoke again. Brat, your 10-tailed Divine Fox clan lives in seclusion in the unworldly secret realm. When did you actually walk into the continent? 10-tailed Divine Fox? Suddenly, Yi Xian thought of the glorious Empress main body. It turned out that the glorious Empress main body was actually a 10-tailed Divine Fox. The Great Elder had clearly misunderstood and thought that he was from the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. After all, Yi Xian had used the abilities of the 3 glorious Empresses in succession, which was also the innate ability of the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. Yi Xian understood this point and the corner of his mouth slightly curled up. Who cares about the 10-tailed Divine Fox? Yi Xian doesn't care that much. As long as he gets the benefits, that's enough. Let's go. Yi Xian casually waved his hand and ignored the Great Elder with Ouyang Shui. It was obvious that the Great Elder was extremely afraid of the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan. Seeing Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui calmly leave, some of the ordinary elders didn't understand the Great Elder's actions and asked, Great Elder, could it be that we're just going to let the 2 of them leave? They've killed so many of our disciples. Once the clansmen of those disciples pursue the matter, how are we going to deal with them? The Great Elder turned his head to look at the elder and said indifferently, Tell them if anyone has any objections, they can go directly to the 10-tailed Divine Fox clan to interrogate them, as long as they have the guts. Great Elder, I wonder what's so special about that 10-tailed Divine Fox? Why are you so afraid? Humph, Lord Divine Lord's original body is really a 10-tailed Divine Fox. Tell me, if Lord Divine Lord finds out that his clansmen were devoured by our Watermoon Heavenly Abode disciples, what do you think the consequences will be? Don't pretend that I don't know that your clansmen were also killed by this person, but let me tell you the truth. Pray that this person will not cause trouble for you, otherwise, the day of your clan's annihilation will not be far. What? Almost all the Watermoon sect elders paled in shock. Very few people knew what the true body of a demon god's sacred realm's divine lord was, but they didn't expect that this Great Elder would actually know. If this was really the case, then forget about using resources to exchange for safety. They would even be willing to hand over the resources of their entire clan. All the elders almost immediately went to find the juniors of their clansmen and began to teach them a lesson. This was because they knew very well that if this matter was not handled properly, it would be a calamity that would lead to the annihilation of their clan. Challenging the Lord God's original race was no different from courting death. Of course, Yi Xian didn't know that he'd accidentally impersonated the main body of the demon god domain's divine lord. At this moment, Yi Xian had already opened the universe ring that the Great Elder had given him. However, when he saw the resources within the universe ring, Yi Xian was overjoyed. Originally, he had only followed the steps down and left because the Great Elder had given him a way out. However, he didn't expect that the Great Elder would actually compensate him, and it was such a generous one at that. It could be said that the resources within the universe ring that the Great Elder had given him were dozens of times more than all of the resources on Yi Xian's body. Of course, this was half of the Watermoon Cave's inventory, so the amount was naturally quite a bit. System. Categorize the resources. Leave behind the resources that are useful to me, and devour the rest. Following Yi Xian's order,
The system directly categorized them. Very quickly, there were already results. Amongst the thousands of resources, only a dozen or so were determined by the system to be useful to Yi Xian in the future. The rest were directly devoured by Yi Xian. Ding! System notification. Host has broken through. Current third-grade Divine Emperor. 2 realms in a row. Yi Xian was extremely satisfied with this result. As expected, he still had to rob in order to obtain more resources and more benefits. After Yi Xian left the Watermoon Cave, he brought Ouyang Shui along with him. After all, although Yi Xian wasn't afraid of the Watermoon Cave, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the difference in strength. It had to be known that not to mention the cave master, even the Great Elder wasn't a match for Yi Xian. Thus, Yi Xian prepared to loot other places. This time, Yi Xian's goal was to find those holy suns. Yi Xian wanted to see how different these holy suns were from the demon god's domain. Yi Xian's first target was the Hopeless Mountain that was closest to the Watermoon Cave. In the Hopeless Mountain, there was a holy sun in the divine crocodile race. Yi Xian's intention was very simple. He wanted to meet the holy son of the divine crocodile race. According to what he heard from the heavens, the holy son of the divine crocodile race was also a middle-level divine emperor stage expert. His strength was comparable to Yi Xian's, so Yi Xian wanted to see what kind of heaven-defying methods this holy son had. Actually, how could Yi Xian not want to leave this place as soon as possible? However, with all the passageways sealed, it seemed like the only thing he could count on was the dual-path secret realm that the 8 great divine generals controlled. However, how could the 8 great divine generals be so easy to deal with? Therefore, if Yi Xian wanted to return to the Kunlun divine domain, it could be said that he didn't have the strength to do so. Moreover, in the demon god's domain, Yi Xian's cultivation speed would undoubtedly be much faster. After all, in the demon god's domain, Yi Xian could kill these divine beasts without fear and quickly increase his strength. After all, Yi Xian clearly remembered the 10,000 years of the contract with the 2 great halls. Yi Xian also remembered the power of that mysterious secret realm very clearly. Therefore, the only way to increase his level was to increase his level quickly. 3 things. The first was to find Luo Luo's whereabouts. The second was to return to the Kunlun divine domain. The third was to increase his speed quickly, and then go to the mysterious secret realm to train. These were the 3 most important things in Yi Xian's heart. That was why Yi Xian went to look for other holy suns. After all, looking for other holy suns would allow him to complete these 3 tasks at the same time. If he was looking for a holy sun, then it would be possible for him to find out Luo Luo's whereabouts through the other holy suns. Even if one didn't work, there would be 10 or 100 of them. There would always be one who knew of Luo Luo's existence. And killing a holy sun would undoubtedly be able to quickly raise his cultivation and strengthen himself. That way, he would be able to enter the mysterious secret realm trial even faster. At the same time, every holy sun had a lot of resources in his hands. Perhaps he could also find a way to head to the Kunlun divine domain. Therefore, the holy sun was Yi Xian's best choice right now. Chapter 2856. Poor human clan Mount Hopeless was a ruin left behind by the excavation of a spiritual stone mine. However, after thousands of years of changes, divine trees and divine flowers grew here again. At the same time, some changes were triggered, turning the ruins into a flourishing holy land. The divine crocodile clan was not originally a divine beast here. However, when they discovered the natural spiritual pool here, they did not go far. They forcibly dispersed the surrounding divine beasts and occupied Mount Hopeless. The divine crocodile clan spent most of their time cultivating in the spiritual pool. Only a portion of the guards stayed to guard the surroundings. After all, when they occupied Mount Hopeless, they had killed many people, so they had to be on guard at all times. Even now, the divine crocodile clan did not dare to let their guard down. At this moment, Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui were walking along Mount Hopeless. Unexpectedly, Ouyang Shui actually thought of something. Big brother Yi, I remember this place. In the ruins of Mount Hopeless, there is a human clan village. I came here when I was young, and this village is one of the few human clan villages that can settle down in one place. Human clan village? Ever since he arrived at the demon god's domain, Yi Xian had mostly heard about how the human clan was bullied, but in reality, he hadn't seen much of the human clan. Since there was such an opportunity, Yi Xian naturally didn't want to let it go. All right, Let's go to this village first. As Yi Xian nodded in agreement, the two of them quickly walked forward with Ouyang Shui leading the way. This place was originally just a ruin, so it was naturally not that easy to pass through. The ruins of a spirit stone mine were different from the ruins of an ordinary mine. Because a spirit stone vein was a special substance formed by the heavens and earth, it was naturally blessed by the laws. Even though the spirit stones in the vein had long since been dug out, the laws still existed. Almost every digger of a spirit stone vein knew of a legend, and that was that even if the ruins of a spirit stone vein were completely dug out, it wouldn't be long before a new mother lode would be formed, and a new spirit stone vein would be born. What was a mother lode? That was a treasure that countless people could only dream of. Anyone who obtained it would be able to use it greatly. There were two main characteristics of a mother lode. The first was that it would automatically gather the divine power of the world and produce all kinds of minerals. In fact, everyone knew this even without saying. The most important thing was his second characteristic. This characteristic could be said to be known by very few people. That was the blessing of the laws. Those who possessed the mother lode would be able to obtain a special blessing when cultivating the laws. Of course, it was extremely difficult to obtain the mother lode. Even if it was a mine, it might not necessarily give birth to a mother lode. That thing was something that could only be found by chance. Now that Yi Xian had arrived at the ruins of the mine, he naturally held some expectations. System, activate all detection and try to find the mother lode as much as possible. Yi Xian instructed the system. Then the two of them continued forward. Unfortunately, it was just like the legends. It was extremely difficult to obtain a mother lode. Along the way, Yi Xian didn't receive any notifications from the system. In other words, he didn't discover a mother lode. However, just as Yi Xian was about to give up, the system's notification rang out. Ding, system notification, host, please pay attention, traces of mother lode have been detected ahead. There really was a mother lode. It could be said that this was an unexpected surprise. What's up ahead? Yi Xian asked Ouyang Shui. Ouyang Shui glanced at Yi Xian in astonishment, then said, "That village is in front of us." The reason why Ouyang Shui was surprised was because she thought that Yi Xian had already discovered something special about this place. However, she didn't know that Yi Xian had only detected the existence of the mother lode. When Yi Xian heard Ouyang Shui's reply, he didn't say much and continued forward. After walking for a while, the two of them discovered a cave, and that cave was the entrance. The strangest thing was that outside the cave, there was actually the power of the laws. These laws seemed to have formed a door, cleverly hiding the cave. In other words, unless one saw it with the naked eye, one would not be able to discover it with their spiritual will. As a matter of fact, for powerhouses, they would usually trust their own divine sense more than their own eyes. Therefore, even if a divine beast expert passed by this place, if they didn't have any spiritual will and didn't notice anything unusual, they naturally wouldn't check it out. Furthermore, the cave was extremely hidden. Even if someone came down to search, it would be difficult for them to detect anything special. No wonder the human village was able to hide in this cave for so long. All of this was because of the hidden door constructed by the laws. At this moment, Yi Xian had some understanding in his heart. He was afraid that the gate of laws had a certain connection with the mother or. Perhaps it was very likely that the mother or was the true guardian of this village. The two of them carefully walked towards the cave. According to Ouyang Shui, the people in the village had set up countless traps in the cave. Although these traps and mechanisms wouldn't threaten Yi Xian, after all, the people in the village had set up these traps with great difficulty. Yi Xian didn't want to destroy them like this. After all, these were all set up by the people of the village to prevent divine beasts from barging in. Fortunately, Ouyang Shui was quite familiar with this place. Coupled with Yi Xian's powerful spiritual will, they were able to escape unscathed. Very quickly, the two of them arrived at the interior of the cave. Yi Xian could already clearly see the faint flames. "Who is it? Who are you people?" Suddenly, a loud roar rang out. Soon after, a few humans rushed out. They held simple spears in their hands. These spears were not magic treasures, but were made from some kind of vine. One could imagine how powerful they were. But this was their only weapon. "We are humans, don't worry," Ouyang Shui hurriedly said. As expected, when they heard that it was a human, those people weren't that afraid. However, they didn't relax their vigilance in the slightest.
Only after Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui walked out did those people recognize their identities as humans.
You are Xiao Shui?
An older person looked at Ouyang Shui and asked in surprise.
Yes, I am Ouyang Shui. Hello, Uncle Lin.
Meeting an acquaintance undoubtedly made these people very happy. The human race lived in fear in the demon god's celestial realm. Take this village for example. Many people had never left the demon god's celestial realm in their entire lives, and most of those who left never returned. Yi Xian and Ouyang Shui were received in a grand manner. It could be said that this village had already taken out their best things to receive Yi Xian.